Good morning, folks. Got my cuppa, 10 a.m. We're just after here on the sunny Gold Coast. Not so sunny today. I'm kind of happy about that. I like a rainy day. Big shout out to ET Guitars that sent me a whole bunch of cleaning products, which I'm going to be giving away real soon. Chicken picks, my choice of pick. I've got a whole bunch of them right here. Love them. Been using the same one for about 2 years. Haven't gone through it. And Summer Cable. Love those guys. They really look after me. Enough of my chit chat. There's somebody lurking around outside. Ring the buzzer, mate. Ring the buzzer. Where's my doorbell? Who's that? Oh, it's Mr. Frank Falbo. Hey, Frank. How you doing? Oh, look at that. Applause even. Joining me from sunny California, I believe, yeah?
It is, yeah.
Yeah? I just said I got a bit of a gloomy day outside here. How's it looking in your part of the world?
It's fine. I'm in Ventura, California. It's usually in the 70s and the sun's out. What are you going to do?
70s, man. That's you US guys with your crazy measurements.
Yeah, I don't do metric temperatures.
You guys are stubborn in that regard, hey?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, it gets me. Like, I'm trying to work out things. 70? Man, that's like almost boiling point here. Frank,
Yeah.
You were the first guy I had on for a live stream, and I must thank you for that, because that was very much, oh my God, I'm live, what do I do? It was you and Remco from Apollo
Yeah.
Music Parts. So
Yeah.
I must thank Remco for setting up the connection there.
Mhm.
I haven't gone back and watched that because as I said to you off air, if I was to watch myself, I would have given up a long time ago.
Oh, you're fine. It was
Yeah,
fine. Trust
yeah.
me. Take my word for it.
Frank, I'm going to start with the one question I ask everybody, and that is,
Okay.
I may have asked you this in the first one. I really can't remember.
You may have.
Yeah.
I don't know. You haven't seen it, so you're not going to know.
Yeah, yeah. But I want to know, what started the love affair with the electric guitar for you, mate?
Probably, it's weird to say Elvis because it makes me sound a little older than I am, but it was Elvis, but by the time I was like a little kid, he was, already old and dying. But we're talking like 5 or 6 or 7, right?
Yep.
And I thought that was cool, and started playing acoustic when I was 8. I learned from a folk teacher, who actually coincidentally just happened to also be Muriel Anderson's first guitar teacher back in the day. So I learned a bit of fingerstyle and dexterity from that. But by the time I was like 11 or 12, I was already on the electric and wanted to play rock and roll and stuff like that. I did the entire time, So yeah, I started on electric. Kind of taught myself the electric side of things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had the beginner lessons were on the acoustic.
Man, it's funny you bring up Elvis being a big influence. Good friend of mine is a chap named Louis Shelton. Not sure if that name rings a bell. He was part of the whole Wrecking Crew scene, and he just lives around the corner from me here. And he actually had Elvis come to his school and perform before he was a big name, and they were just like, "Oh my God, how's this guy?" Which is that would just be mind blowing.
Yeah,
yeah. But
silly.
That's led you down quite a path. Over the years, you've become quite the designer. You've got your own guitar company. You do a lot of teching for some pretty big names. So
Sure.
some of the things you've helped in designing, I realize you're on the R&D team of Fishman Fluence pickups. They're very popular at the moment. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's been great. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. How long ago did the concept for those come about?
An aerospace company came up with the idea of those layered PCBs, and they'll use them like in microwave, like antennas and stuff that's in satellites. And the guy who invented it also happened to play guitar. And so he brought me the technology and showed it to me. They had made a functioning pickup out of it that just made sound. And they basically said, we know this is something, but we don't know what to do with it, nor would they want to. As an aerospace company, they're not interested in doing that. But their management was all for pursuing other avenues, of developing the use of this technology. So they actually brought it to me while I was still as a vice president of product development at Seymour Duncan. And Seymour Duncan kicked the idea around and then did not do anything with it. And so I knew I knew its potential. and I was already then I left Seymour Duncan, and so the two things timed out, perfectly. Where it was kind of time for me to move on anyway, start my guitar company, go to work for Fishman, develop the Fluence technology over at Fishman, and so that became sort of my two-pronged approach. Once I left Duncan, was to develop Fluence over at Fishman, and then start making my guitars.
Awesome, awesome. So that means you're very tech savvy. How did you learn all the tech side of things?
Man, I started when I was 11, 12, 13, just playing electric. I was already taking my guitars apart. So that was kind of, that's a cliched story for a lot of people, for good reason. But, taking apart clock radios, fixing things, trying, that type of stuff. I don't have the formal education, so I couldn't go get a job at a Digitech as an electrical engineer, because I don't have the electrical engineering degree. But I can work with engineers to come up with a lot of solutions. And sometimes because I think outside the box and I don't have the education, I might suggest something. I was just talking to a guy who's in school right now, and just telling him how there was one circuit where with bucket brigades and clocks and things like that, and because of all the parts drifting and part tolerances on a stereo circuit, it was like you turn the knobs and they would drift a little bit from one another. And the engineers, they didn't have a solution for that. To them, it was just, well, how do we calibrate these things right? And it was just, I'm looking at the circuit, I'm talking to him, and I said something like, what if you did this and this and this to bleed current from one place to the next, so that when you made these adjustments, they would eventually balance out? And sure enough, it worked. It was, within one or two cycles of that sine wave of the modulation, chorus goes up and down, right? Flanging goes up and down. And within one or two cycles, those analog part, imperfect parts would then come back into balance. And those are little things that, are, like, they're smart because they're dumb, or I'm dumb because I'm smart, or one or the other. I don't.
Yep.
It's just not having the education, not having the full knowledge, but then sort of being able to just kind of a blue sky, some things.
Yeah.
But I'm nothing without an engineer. I'm nothing without really good, electrical engineers, around me, helping me with,
Sure.
and making this stuff, come to light.
Yeah. It's funny, I've come to realize that people that are trained in a certain field, they learn the things they teach them in school, but they don't, if they haven't had that passion prior to work things out for themselves, there's little things that they'd be like, oh, I didn't teach us about that in school.
Yeah. And the one guy that happened to be a NASA engineer at some point. He had put things in space. He'd worked on the Mars rover. This is not for lack of understanding or knowledge at all.
Yep.
Like I said, it's the dumb solution sometimes that turns out to work, but you can count on me for some dumb suggestions every once in a while, I guess.
Yep. But it's that different way of thinking, isn't it? Rather than the school. Yeah.
It really is. Yeah. It's coming at something from a different perspective. And that's how you end up with something like P-Rails too. Somebody's, how can I make a humbucker that sounds like a P90 when it's split and this and that? And people had tried little ceramic magnets underneath a humbucker coil, and then Alnico over here or whatever. And they tried all these things. And then I'm just sitting there looking at them saying, like, okay, I can fit the P90 geometry within the humbucker shell. So therefore, how do I now, build everything else around that to end up with a functioning humbucker, that provides these, woofer and a tweeter and this extended range and things like that. But so some of those things like that, I'm just as surprised as anyone else that I happen to be the first guy to bring something like that to market or come up with it. So.
And the same with Luthier, like with your own guitar company. That's all just a self-taught skill, is it?
It is, yeah. So a little bit of woodworking, training and things like that. But yeah, I used to comb through the Stuart McDonald catalog and watch all the, videos that I could to try to just absorb that knowledge. I didn't do well in school because instead of that, I was trying to figure out guitars. So I had the bandwidth. I just wasn't applying it to 11th grade biology or something like that.
That's quite a common a common thing.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think they try that they probably label that as ADHD or something now. You know, why aren't you paying
Absolutely.
attention to this? And
Absolutely, yeah, yeah, and there are, and I'm happy that some of those things are being brought to light, or people are calling things what they are. You know, they're coming up with new names for things. Sometimes it's not that. You know, I've made some jokes on other, podcasts that sometimes maybe the teacher could just be a little more interesting and not go home and drink a bottle of Jack Daniels every night, regret their life decisions. But if it's engaging, then I'll usually want to learn about it.
yeah, it's funny. It reminds me of when I was back in high school, and I'm pretty much self-taught with everything. But the back of guitar magazines was a great resource with all the columns and everything in there. And I remember going back to my senior year in high school, and I was doing film and television, and
Okay.
they were trying to do watch this old movie from the 1950s and do a review on it or whatever. And I was recently diagnosed with ADHD, and one of the things that I realize is if I'm into something, I'm so into it. I'm obsessive. If I don't if I don't not into something, I really don't give a fuck. And that was one of those I really don't give a fuck moments. And so I'm sitting there flicking through my guitar magazines, and I was reading a home recording column, probably Craig Anderson or one of those guys.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And I remember my teacher walking past and snatching my magazine off me and taking it. And then he went and sat down, and he opened it up to the page I was at. He started reading it, and he came over to me. He's put it in front of me. He goes, "Is this what you're reading?" I said, "Yep." He goes, "Do you understand that?" I said, "Yep." And he just sort of looked around. He just went, "You keep reading that, because that's years ahead of what I'm trying to teach you." So so you need somebody to acknowledge that. Yeah, the right teacher that go, "Oh, okay, this guy doesn't fit in the curriculum, but he's doing good on his own." So
well, I had a double whammy. So my first, and up until senior year in high school, I was at a Catholic school, a private school. So small school, very narrow focus. Walk this line, do exactly these things, or else you don't fit in. And so they were not into that really. It's funny. Sometimes I get the little alumni letters, like, "Oh, would you like to donate for for the continued?" I'm like, no, I would not. No offense, but no.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, who knows? Maybe by now they're a completely different operation, and they give everyone space to become, to be who they are. But when I went to the public school, my senior year, that was where I had wood shop and electronics, and I was able to do independent study and build guitars in school.
Wow.
And that was, so that was great. That really helped, push me along, so that by the time I, was out of high school, even I was already making guitars.
Awesome. And so did you start off making guitars for yourself?
Yeah.
Seems to be a
I
common...
would do some for other people. Some friends would want me to make something, or maybe my bandmate needed a guitar, so we'd put something together for him. But yeah, I had started off. So by the time I was even leaving high school age, I was already making the complete guitar. I was already making the neck, the body, and pre-bought fingerboards. Maybe you don't do the fret slots.
Yep.
But I was already that engaged at that stage, and so then everything subsequent to that is just built upon that.
Cool. And it's funny, we were just talking about the whole schooling thing and having that bit of paper. I think in creative fields, man, that really doesn't mean much, does it?
It depends on the situation, but you're right.
Yeah. I've worked in a few studios where people would be constantly ringing up wanting to get studio work, and you say to the boss, "Oh, this guy's applied," and he's gone, "Well, mate, tell him to come in here and make tea." And you got the guy, "Oh no, but I just graduated this school." "That's good, mate. Come in and make some tea."
I'll tell you how I take my tea.
Yeah. So, Frank, I really wanted to pick your brains just about guitar teching, because I know you've just done a run teching for Steve Stevens.
Yeah.
And I know in the past you've done some work with Steph Carpenter from the Deftones as well, and I've seen that rig, and it looks quite complex. Is there any other guys out there that I'm missing that you've done some work for?
Not too much. I mean, it's always been like fill-in work. So I, Warren DeMartini a few months back. Just a handful of people. Jack Blades was there, but that hadn't been my career path. It's not something that I one that I started doing, or was pursuing. What happened is I'm really good friends with a lot of techs, and so the one main tech, Rem, I've been good friends with him for years. We're building some guitars together. I've worked on Steph's guitars with him, worked on with Steve Stevens with him. And so when the times, when he would be double booked between them, I would fill in with one or the other. And so now this most recent tour, he can't do it. And so I did it. I may end up being Steve's tech going forward in perpetuity. I don't know. I'm good. I'm good with however this thing plays out. But that's why you see me doing that late in the game. Billy Idol obviously doesn't tour, 24/7, 365 days a year. So that was still it. It's not going to interfere with me making guitars. I still can come back to my shop and keep making guitars. I'm here now. Next week, a little bit of Las Vegas. Tomorrow, there's a recording down in Los Angeles. I'll drive down, I'll drive back, and I may still be working on guitars at night, by 5:30 p.m. by this time tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah. So I wanted to pick your brains a little bit about Steve's rig, and I was going to say just before COVID. Yeah, I guess it was before everything shut down. I happened to see Billy Idol playing in Brisbane, and met Steve afterwards. Thanks to Dave Friedman, he lined that up for me. And what a lovely chap. I also had him on for a live chat, and Steve's just a champion, isn't he?
He's the best, yeah, and he's into gear, and he understands it all, so you can have great conversations with him. He's not a diva, He's he's the total package. Like I said, I didn't pursue this, so it's not like the minute those gigs are over, I'm thinking like, who else can I tech for? What other gig can I get? I am so happy to just be hanging with him, and people like Steph. It's just you pick and choose. I have the luxury, I should say, to be able to pick and choose that I have my own business and I do other things, so I can decide, if I want to go out or not. Yeah. And he's great. Yeah, he's so great.
So when I had Steve on the show, he phoned in quite early, like it's probably about half hour out, and everything worked fine. So we just had a bit of a chat, and I said to him, man, your tone was absolutely kicking. And he was quite excited to tell me that they were doing something different, and that they weren't running mics on stage anymore. That was all running through speaker IRs, and how he went out the front and heard it and just went, oh my God, this is just amazing. Are you, off the top of your head, do you know the signal flow of his rig? Are you able to run through that?
So
give us a rundown.
If they were running IRs then, I would assume they were running that Boss Wazacraft amp expander.
He was, yep.
So that is what's in his rig now. Now that you're right, that just happened because, or prior to COVID, the previous times that I had filled in for him was still the Bradshaw rig, amps, center, left, and right cabinets, all three mic'd, And so that was the rig that I had set up for him the last time. Now, he had a side project called Deadline Ritual, where he was using just the pedal board and a fewer number of heads, right? He wasn't doing center, left, and right. So the current rig that you see was kind of born out of that. It was born out of trying out a little smaller rig, realizing it sounded great, and then working that into his Billy Idol rig. So he still plays the Friedmans. It's still a real amplifier. And if anything, he may be allowed to even crank those amplifiers a little louder because they're hitting the Wazacraft. He doesn't have to worry about the speaker cabinets themselves. But we used to have to cover those in blankets and soundproofing and all those things, so we had a relatively quiet stage. Those cabinets were off stage. They were very far to the back. And at the beginning of this tour, we still would have a couple of cabinets as backups just in case we went that route. But as time has gone by, we hadn't been even setting those up. We're just using the Wazacraft. So he uses the Celestion IR pack in there. I can't tell you which one he's using. He would know, but I just know it as setting number 10 on the amp expander.
Okay.
But it's whatever he has loaded in there. Maybe it's a Friedman cabinet, or it could be a Soar cabinet or something. He had been. Oh, I know. Yeah, he's still using two different ones. So what he sends to the house as left is not the same as what he sends to the house as right. So it's just to mix it up a little bit. They're both Celestians, but so those are the two signals. But between those two things is RJM, I believe is the name, the pedal board, switcher, and a giant pedal board filled with various items that most of which are not on until they need to be for a specific song. So in that regard, it's similar to an old Bradshaw rig, where everything was looped in and out. The boards were made by Dave Friedman, and there's also a Line 6, the Helix something or other. I
HX
think it's a
effects.
Helix. Yeah,
HX
that's right,
effects.
the
Yep.
HX effect. And that's really like ping pong delays and a few other things, but it's not used as what I would say a tone piece
Yep.
in his rig. It's just in and out when he needs those delays or and he has like an analog. He has a memory man like on his board as well. I can't remember if it's the big one or whatever, but so he has. I think those were still analog. I'm not sure. There might have been a deluxe memory man with tap tempo. I can't remember if there was ever an all digital memory man, but so he has those effects like sitting on his board. Then he'll sometimes use those, or he'll sometimes have something programmed in the Line 6. Sometimes it's a noise gate in the Line 6.
Okay.
And
Is he also using
that stuff that kicks in and out?
So I've got an HX effects just sitting down there, and as soon as you mentioned that, and just knowing his heads and everything, there is a channel switching function on that. Is that what he's using to change the channels?
Probably not. No, he's using
Nope.
that RJM, that multi switcher. That's that.
Ah,
huge
sure.
thing
Okay.
that's a huge grid of a bunch of pedals. So
Yep.
he taps one button on that, and everything goes, everything goes from there.
Yep.
So that's going to be what changes the amp's channels, and then within that, he can still go in and tap on individual effects if he
Sure.
wants to. I should say individual effects over on the pedal board. And then I think even on there might even be some scene changes, because you got to tell the board what to do with everything, what you want each button to do. So he may have some things where he can then go in and tap a scene change on the Line 6 that's irrespective of everything else in the chain.
Yep.
But
Cool.
yeah.
And that's so all that hits the Boss Tube Amp expander, and then you said you've got two different IRs set up in that's sending to front of house.
Right.
Is that
Right.
purely just to get a bit more of a stereo width about it? Is he still running stereo?
I assume so. Oh yeah, it is stereo, and there's
Yep.
ping pong on like Flash for fancy, and so there's it's definitely a stereo rig through and through. We're not using the Wazacraft amp expanders for their effects loop, so there's not anything stuck in there like a delay or anything like that. That's just used like a attenuator.
Yep.
And then it goes off to the front of house.
Cool.
From there.
Am I right in thinking that he's not using any cabs on stage on this current run?
So that's what I was saying is we started off we put him up there. Depending on, we still travel with them, but you are correct. We're not listening to any cabinets on stage right now. Like I said, there was a time when we would turn them up a little bit, leave the mics on, and it was a just in case. But the irony there is, if it's the Boss that has a problem, I have to unplug it anyways and plug it into cabinets. You know what I mean? It's like, so there's not really any, but it's kind of a pacifying thing where you're like, all right, well, at least I have some cabinets up here, in case I need them.
Yeah.
But you're right. Yeah, the cabinets really aren't part of what you hear out in front of house.
And I think just looking at pictures, I saw that he's got two of the Tube Amp expanders. Is that just a redundancy?
No, that's the stereo.
Okay.
That's why, and so he'll set 1-to-1. So they are set up as two, like dual mono, but they are paired left and right. Yeah.
Okay. And does he have any redundancy stuff going on in his rig if something should go down, or is it just like, no, this is pretty bloody reliable, we'll just leave this go as is?
No, I mean, because technically the backup for the amp expander is to plug straight into the cabinet, right, and to put microphones up. The head cabinet has backup heads, so we can plug in another. There's a third backup head. He uses two heads. What's the likelihood that both go down? Very slim. So we have one backup head, and the pedal board is not backed up. So his MIDI control pedal board and all that. But he had been traveling with a backup pedal board. He just got the Neural DSP Quad Cortex.
Oh yeah.
So that became the backup. Now he took the time to program the set onto that. That became the backup. We did a fly date in I believe in Alaska, where that is all he used. So he is capable of using that for a whole show. But, he leaned over to me after. He goes, it's okay for 80-90%, it gets you there, but it's not it, and so I wouldn't foresee him going to that. I know Megadeth has gone all to that.
Yep.
But for someone like Steve, he's not there yet. But it's a great backup. In fact, to me, it's a better backup than the pedal board because you don't have to tap dance. He actually has his gig programmed into it. So as a backup, he can just still get, just tap through all the different songs.
Awesome. Like you say, it is 80-90% there.
Yeah.
There's just that little something.
Yeah.
And, people keep posting things saying, oh, listen to this, it's identical. And I was actually at the Melbourne Guitar Show a couple of years ago, and I went to see Brett Kingman do a demo of the Boss Wazercraft stuff compared to, and he was A-Bing against a Friedman head. And he was like, okay, and he was doing this A-B thing. And I was picking them every time. And I think at one point he sort of turned around, he's going, but you obviously know the answers. Put your hand down. It's like,
this is
no, I can hear it. And for me, people seem to listen to these simulators and things as in terms of EQ, and they've got that nailed. But if you listen to it like you're listening to a compressor,
depth. That's right. Yeah,
it's the dynamic that's different to me anyway, and just the way it sits in the track. Yeah. Are you hearing the same thing?
And a lot of a lot of those things that are set up like gotchas, they're like, see, you can't tell, or some, half the people even picked the simulation and thought that sounded better. And it's like, well, that's great. But we're talking about the way it feels when I'm behind the strings, when I'm actually the person that's striking the strings and then feeling that interaction and what that compression curve is like and the harmonic multiples that are contained within a distortion, the distortion, it's like, that's when the person will, the person who's playing the instrument will often know more than you will in the first, second, third row, let alone in the back of the room. And so these discussions aren't really about that. I liken these discussions more to a paintbrush. Can an artist paint me a beautiful picture with different paintbrushes than what are their favorites? And the answer is yes, they can still do it. And you'll still look at the picture and the painting, you'll say, that's amazing, that's fantastic. But the artist will say, I wish I had my brushes. And those are the kinds of things, to the artist, to the person who has to express and has to do the work, if they can feel the difference, then it's there. The other part of it is, in my experience, is listener fatigue. And that can be for the player as well. But in short stabs or in short demos, whether it's compressed on YouTube or not, we can hear this and we can say, oh, yeah, that does sound great. It sounds really good. 10 minutes in, 20 minutes in, again, even as the player recording tracks, there can be a little bit of a fatigue that sets in. And those are the kind of things that lie beneath. They lie below something that I can show you on a scope. They fall below, below me being able to pick favorites out of 20, 10 are sims and 10 are real,
Yep.
It's not that. It's, just give me the guitar, let me get behind the thing and I'll tell you what I want to play.
Sure. And another thing for me is the listener experience. If you're a fanboy like me that likes to get right down the front of a concert and not hearing it coming out of the cabs on stage, I've had quite a few guests on who I've seen live, and I've been that guy down the front, and they're raving to me about, I've got this Axifex rig now. It's so convenient to travel with. Seems to be the big thing.
Absolutely.
Convenient to travel with.
The
and
quad
sounds
cortex is like this big. We have it in a little briefcase.
Yeah.
You
But I'm thinking, but I saw you when I was right down the front, and
you
were right there, but your sound was coming from way out to the sides there, and I kind of missed when I used to see you guys and having your ramp in my face.
Yeah.
So there's that element too, isn't there?
Yeah, and that is missing. I mean, they do run some wedges. There is some stage noise, but for the most part, you're right. But the fact that he has two power sections being cranked up, hitting those amp expanders with the Celestion IRs, when you're out front of house, that impact really is still coming through the PA with a lot of power, a lot of gusto. And then of course there's his synth rig and his acoustic rig because he's playing those two things as well. So it's a pretty extensive setup.
So how does he run the synths and the acoustics?
He uses piezo drivers, so not the magnetic Roland style,
Hmm.
but he's got piezos in a Floyd, and he's got other obviously acoustic guitars have the piezos in them, hexaphonic piezos, and they're still using all the 13 pin, Roland MIDI, and he goes to the GR30, I think it is. Um, that's the synth that he uses. And so then that rig has a stereo signal that sends to the front of house. For the acoustic, he was using a mic preamp, like a real expensive, nice one, and it sounded great. Gave us a few problems, and then I talked to my Fishman buddies, and I said, let's get him a Platinum Pro. There's Platinum Pro DI and the Aura pedal, uh, and I tone matched him, to the preamp that he was using. And that day that we got it, an artist friend of mine up in San Francisco, I had it shipped to his house because I knew I could get it. He could go there and I would get it from him. And when we were in San Francisco, so Prashant brought it over and gave it to me. We plugged it in. That night he was already using it. He's like, "This sounds better than this preamp that I was using." Um, and then the beauty is we don't really bring the Aura imaging in. You're familiar with
No, I'm
Fishman's
not.
Aura
No, no.
technology? Okay. So this is a perfect segue because they've been doing that for years, if not 20. I mean, maybe it's decades now, but they've been working on this technology. And with the popularity of IRs, it's become much easier to actually explain what they're doing, because that an IR would take away the cabinet and the microphone relationship and
Yep.
replace it. What Fishman had always been doing with the Aura system was taking the sound from the piezo, right? It's a very two-dimensional sound, and replacing everything that was between that and if you had a beautiful microphone sitting out in front of the guitar. And so it is, in essence, it's like an IR for your acoustic guitars. It kind of functions that way. It's if I was sitting a couple of feet in front of my acoustic guitar listening to it, how would that sound versus the piezo? And in order to do that, that's why I liken it to the IRs. In order to do that, you do need to span the time constant. It's not an EQ curve. It's got nothing to do with it. It's not reverb either, but it's that space in a room. And so Fishman has hundreds, if not thousands now in their library of all these different images that you can download. But mainly, they sell the box. If you get the floor box, you can scan through like all the different bodies, jumbo, dreadnought, this and that, and there's a bunch of different images per each one. So you get a pedal that has a ton of images. And so what we do now is when it's TV or broadcast, then we'll dial in some of that, so that's more that sort of coffee house acoustic sound,
Okay. Yep.
But when you have screaming SPL coming out of a PA system, it's kind of ends up being something you don't really need. You don't need that sort of intimate sound of, that you just get around the campfire listening to the acoustic guitar. You need
Yep.
that piezo and that power, And he does a nylon string solo in the gigs. That's just beautiful. So we don't really, we dial it back there. We dial it up when it's like a DI thing, for studio or
Yep.
for inside of a studio. We just did a talk show, Jimmy Kimmel talk show, and Billy
Yep. Saw
Morrison
that.
was playing the acoustic. Yeah, so
Yep.
that's on Billy's acoustic on that one. So he's got one now, and he looked at Steve. He was like, I can't. My acoustic sounded the best it sounded, And it's like, well, that's what that box does.
Nice.
So
And does
that's the acoustic rig now.
Okay, and does that handle some of the issues that piezo pickups have in the dynamics? I know that piezo kind of, when you're hitting it soft, it's really soft. When you hit it hard, it's not a natural curve.
That's
Does
correct,
the Aura help deal with some of that?
It can, just because it's now communicating what would have happened if there was a microphone sitting in front of the guitar. But both the Platinum and the Aura have compressors on them as well. And the compression curve is very natural. It's very much something that you would associate with sort of coming back. If you put it in subtly, you're kind of coming back to what it would sound like with a Neumann right up against the guitar. And if you put it in a little bit more heavy, which he does sometimes for some of his solo stuff, because now you're talking about protecting those drivers on the PA system. You're talking about you have to manage that. It's not about now playing it into earbuds or laying a track.
Yep.
It's about the front of house, and even in ears for that matter. You don't want to blow your ears out by having too much dynamic range. You want to compress that a little bit for your ears. So there is compression on board. Fishman was very smart with their compression. They have it like one knob where you turn it up and it doesn't get louder or quieter. Just the curve changes while it
Great.
simultaneously adjusts for the volume.
Yep.
But so that helped. But he did have a compressor on his other mic pre as well. So I kind of just mimicked that curve.
So on the Jimmy Kimmel, I did see a replay of that, and man, it sounded great. Like Billy's vocals was just so on point.
His voice is great. Yeah. He's got it.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of that is in-ear technology now. Like just the low notes, people would quite often try and oversing, and that causes them to sing sharp, etc. But he just nailed that. And then when he got up at the end, he sort of started belting some higher notes. I'm thinking, that's so on point. Now, one thing I did notice was that Steve did have a cab on stage for that. Mm-hmm. Was that to help with? He had like a very sustainer-like part, and I saw on a forum somewhere on Facebook, somebody was asking about what Steve was using to pull off the sustainer type parts, and you said, "Hey, I know the answer to that. You want to spill the beans?"
I do, yeah. So the cabinet was not on; it was the Wazacraft amp expanders going directly to the. Well, you wouldn't call it front of house, even though there was a PA system. But going direct to broadcast, it was the Wazacraft. That cabinet did not have signal. There are times, there have been times in the past when they would crank the wedges up so that he could get some signal to play off of and feedback with. We're not doing that now. The sound that you heard specifically for that song is a JHS muffletta on the JHS fuzz setting. And so all of that sustain that you hear, that's just him playing the note out, having the note ring out for that long, as he's fading in. So he's got a volume pedal that he rocks up and down to get that attack, right? So he's sort of doing a fade in. But outside of that, there was not anything causing a feedback loop or causing any other kind of infinite sustain. Now, that being said, we did also just grab a Schecter with a sustainer in the neck position, right? The sustainer pickup.
Yep.
And a Floyd Rose. We just got that sort of midway through the last tour. He's not using it on that song, so that's still not, what we're talking about here. But he's having some fun with the sustainer on a couple of other things that he does with solos, where that has allowed him, he'll have it feedback up to a fifth and things like that. So having fun with that has caused him to not need the wedges to also be cranked up, when he's about to do a big feedback guitar solo. He actually he now can walk around and still run that sustainer and turn it on. So he's using that for like 2 or 3 songs now.
Cool.
Just having a blast with it.
I've got a Sustainiac in an old Hamer of mine, and I absolutely love it. I pulled it out a few years back because I had the old late 80s version in there. I think my Hamer is an 89 or a 90.
Okay.
And it had a cavity in the back for 2 9-volt batteries, and the old system, I would chew through those 2 9-volt batteries in an hour. And as soon as the batteries went dead, my bridge pickup, even with the sustainer off, would not work anymore. So I pulled it out.
That's right. Yeah, it does.
Put in a new one a year or so ago. I did a little demo video of that, which Sustainiac have shared the crap out of. And I'm loving the new system. Fraction of the battery power, and I happen to have the cavity, as I mentioned, for 2 9-volts, so I get super duper length life out of that. Yeah,
that's great.
Now, I wanted to ask you about Steph Carpenter's rig, man, because I've seen that a lot, and that's a whole lot of rack gear. He's got like JMP ones and pods, and how is it? Has he got all that running into a big switcher, or does he have everything just going serial?
No, he does have the same kind of switching like Steve, where these guys have their multiple, switcher that basically tells everything what to do and puts things into loops. There was a time when he was using the Axe effects. He did the same thing that you and I talked about a while ago and decided that those Marshall JMP ones were better for him. So it's that, and then I believe he has some rack effects. There's an Intel effects in there and stuff. I could be wrong about that now, but I think there was back then. But I think that's still there. That same friend of mine, Tech, is hanging out with him even probably as we speak. I think working on that rig a little bit. But he's usually in a state of flux on that rig. But it's the Marshall, it's pedals, and then and other goofy effects and stuff like that. and then Fryette power amps. So he's cranking up the Fryette power amps. For front of house, he does actually still run uh, a loader, but it's not the Boss like active IR stuff.
Mm.
He's doing the Rivera. Um, what do you call them? Rock crushers.
Yep. Yep.
And so it is a DI signal still going in front of house, but not quite in the same way. He's not using the IRs. Now maybe he'll switch to that at some point in time too. But when I text for him, that was what he was using, and that was, talk about a backup rig. He traveled with like a backup for everything, so you could always just plug in, something, take something out, and pop something in. So it was a ton of gear, like you say. And a lot of pedals, a lot of pedals out in front of him and a pedal board.
Yeah, right. Right.
Yeah.
So, Frank, on the road as a guitar tech for guys like this, what is your typical day?
Depending, it can start at different times of the morning, but it's an early morning, and you go to do the load in. I have the luxury, I guess, if you want to call it, of being, the guitar, the main lead guitar player in the band's tech, and it's a very complicated rig. Like I said before, it's kind of like setting up 3 rigs: acoustic, synth, electric. And even on the electric side, it's a pretty complicated rig. And so oftentimes between stage hands that they have, I'm not really doing anything that's crazy exertive. It's not to say that I have people do everything for me. It's still you'll still sweat. But it's very nice that they have a lot of stage hands wheeling all the stuff off the truck, bringing it to you where you need to, where you tell them where to put it. Put this here, put that there, put this there. And when everything gets there, sometimes you might even tell them, take the lids off for me. Put the lids over there, get rid of this, whatever. And then I'm doing all the wiring, cabling, setting up the whole rig. That's the morning, midday. Then maybe you get some lunch, and then you go back and do your line checks, so you're basically listening. It's not a true sound check. We're just kind of line checking. A lot of times the band won't do a sound check. They've been doing this long enough.
Yeah.
So as long as the signals are going through, the guy in the monitor board guy and our front of house guy, they know what it's supposed to look like. And so they'll just go right out and start the first song without a sound check. But, and then, so between, after lunch, after line check, it's maybe some restrings and, setting up the guitars and things like that. I like to stay occupied, so I'm usually doing something, to the guitars or trying to make some things better. But,
and do you change strings every show? Is that?
It depends. No, the nice thing with Steve is he travels with like 8 jillion guitars. So every gig, I mean, he has, there's a sparkly Les Paul he plays for the second half of Eyes Without a Face. And that's it every day. You know what I mean? Like, so that guitar has half a song on it every gig. It's like, why would you change strings for a half a song? When you have, if you have another guitar that's used for 6, 7, 8 songs in a show, you might change it the next day. But each individual guitar is not getting that much usage. He has another guitar that lights up. He uses it for that one song.
Yeah.
He has a pink guitar that has a laser type sound in it. That's a new Nags that he just got. He uses it for the one song. So, that's kind of what we're dealing with. So I don't have to. The bass tech, I think, has to change strings every night. Every time. The bass strings are quick to lose. Some of that detailed high end that the bass player wants to hear. Billy Morrison is the other guitar player. I don't know how often he changes strings, but that's another guy who will change guitars out a lot. So in a set like ours, no one particular guitar gets abused too much. And the nylon string, I did one time. I strummed the nylon before the show, and you really have to stretch those strings out like crazy. They'll go out of tune right in the middle of the song. But we were okay. It worked. But ideally with that one, it's like you wait. You got a day off in between, and you could change those strings on the day off in between, so they have a day to sit.
Yeah.
Same thing with acoustics. Maybe 2 shows. After the second show, I'm going to change those strings because the acoustic strings can die pretty quickly.
Do you have any secrets for stretching out strings for people?
No, I stretch up. I go along it, along the length. And sometimes I will, I think it was Dario Planet Waves or somebody had a string stretcher. I wouldn't use that. but it worked by working two different axes. So like I'll hold the string and then push down on it with my thumb, so I'm actually sort of getting like an S out of it, as I run along. Um, but that's about it. I don't have tuning issues, once I stretch the strings out.
Yep.
Some of these guitars are locking, some of them aren't. Um, but I have so some people might not know this, or other techs may not have this. I have a tuner line. So I plug in my, the guitar that I'm about to hand him. I plug it in. I even have like a more like fake amp. It sounds, what do we say, 80-90%, right? No, it sounds a lot like Steve's rig. It's
Yep.
just one of those, thing. It's not great, but I can actually be sitting there. I'm playing along with Steve, listening to how they're tuned for that song. I'm tuning the guitar up, and I'll temper it a little bit. Steve has, graciously said that, when I hand him the guitars, their tuning's a little sweeter. It's just sweetened a little bit, and I'll be cognizant of that. I happen to have like good pitch in my head, and so I'll listen and I'll know what song's coming up, and I'll kind of massage it a little bit for the key of the song of the next guitar that I'm going to hand him. That's another luxury I wouldn't have if I was doing. If I were doing 6 songs per guitar and then you give them back, you have to just, for those types of things, you have no choice. You have to just tune it to the needle, right? You just get the needle in the middle and give it to them, and they're playing all these things. But for me, I get to, like I said, I get to kind of tweak it a little bit based on the key of the song that he's going to play.
And that's funny that you should say that, because man, right in my early days of learning to play electric guitar, a good friend of mine, he was just one of these guys that was a natural musician, but he was too shy to really go into bands or anything. But he would pull apart tape decks and turn it into an amplifier and stuff. But he showed me tuning the guitar to the distortion. Like he'd do the B string. If he did it to a tuner, and then tried to do, I got a guitar right here.
Yeah, thirds, triads, and things
like
that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like if you played the open G string, but then held down the 3rd fret on the B and just do that interval, that gets used a lot. Big power chords, and my guitar's out of tune here. Right. And I would tweak it until that distortion.
Yes. Yeah.
Is that the kind of thing you're talking about?
It is, yeah. So I have a very saturated sound, distorted sound. I can shut it off. I have the 2 channels on that thing. But I am usually tuning with distortion. I'm tuning with heavy distortion. So even when I grab the acoustic guitar or his nylon string, I'm hearing it in my head through all that, amp distortion. So if you were listening to me test that, you'd think it was, an electric guitar sound. But that is absolutely correct. I'm listening for the beating. But again, I'm kind of massaging that between like the thirds and the, you know what I mean? The B string, 1 fret up, down, depending on what he's doing. The first song they open with is a B flat bar chord. It's in B flat, so all the strings pressed down and barring it. So that's, that's an interesting way to tune a guitar to start a show.
Yeah.
Is you're tuning it on, all the notes squeezed down 1st fret and then some.
Now I believe that Eddie Van Halen was similar in wanting his guitars tuned the same. And if you were taking for him, you had to learn his way of tuning.
Yep. Yeah, he bumps stuff a little bit here and there. And a lot of times the players will bump it for how they squeeze the strings. I'm a bit of a chameleon, so if I'm setting stuff up for him, I'll kind of play like him, and if I was setting up a guitar for Yngwie, I would have to do that differently, I wouldn't just grab it and play it the same way and say, hey, you're in tune. And he's pretty particular as well. I think he has, I haven't learned it or anything, but I think Yngwie has a couple of cents, plus and minus here and there that he does.
Okay, yeah. It's really funny. I remember when I was doing this when I was younger, a friend of mine who was a piano tuner who happened to play guitar sort of rubbishing the idea, saying, how can you tune with all that distortion going? And I'm thinking, how can you not? Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. No, you're 100% correct. Those harmonic multiples will go up, and they're actually going into the multiple higher frequencies, which can even establish more, sort of, how do we call it? Like it's even a closer look at how those 2 notes are rubbing together, as you go up, rather than the low beating, of something down at 80 hertz, a longer sine wave, and you have 2 things against each other, but yeah, so I do that. Most of the night in my ears is a very dirty signal that I'm tuning with.
Awesome. Awesome. That's great to know. Um, Frank, I remember talking to you a while back about the ADA preamp. And your face lit up and went, oh man, I know some cool mods for that really bring out some goodness. I've got one sitting right there. I'm interested to know what it is that you like to do to those for anybody that might have one around and give it a bit of a tweak.
Well, so, a lot of capacitor replacements, which you would do on an old amp anyways. So you can just go through and replace a lot of the capacitors in the power chain, but also in the tone, signal. You can mess with values, but even just getting those old caps out and replacing them with better caps that are up to date and fresh is an improvement. The biggest one for me, I'm not a high gain ADA guy. So there's guys that add tube channels and crank up the gain. I have a Burr Brown op amp. There's one right before the tube stage, which if you pull and which clips in naturally inside the ADA the way it works. There's an op amp that will clip a little bit prior to the tube distortions, right? So by pulling that and putting in a higher headroom op amp, you actually get more of your signal going directly to the tube, so you have a more natural tube sound. And again, when I use the ADA, I'm not really cranking up the gain too loud. Most of the time I'm on that, I guess they call it clean tube, right?
Yep.
That's the, but with that gain up at 6, 7, 8, it's still pretty saturated.
Yeah, it sounds cool.
Yeah, and so that's kind of how I use that one. But I'll use the tube distortion setting on it as well sometimes. But for me, that was what it was. It was mostly that. I opened up the frequencies, I think, a little bit on the mid-range and the treble, just slightly. I think I broadened the Q on the mids a little bit. But for the most part, that was to me that was the big one, was to bring the signal to the tubes without having them being distorted by the op amp in front of it.
Okay.
And sometimes I'll run a 12 AT7 in one of the stages, for one of the tubes, just to drop the gain down again, But yeah, that was my thing. I kind of zigged when others zagged. They were looking for more gain out of them. I couldn't see how that would be, valuable.
Yeah,
personally.
yeah.
But it's a great little unit. It doesn't have to be shred. That's the thing. It doesn't. And the way I use it, like I'll use, oftentimes I won't use it by itself. I did, for seasons, but oftentimes I have it in my rack where I'll have that with some distorted, more saturated mids, and I'll combine it with like a Mesa quad preamp that's a little bit more lows and highs, maybe a little less distortion or a little more textured distortion from having two channels at once. So I do a lot making composite sounds. I'll bring 2 or 3 different preamps together out of the same signal, not split, but but I bring them together by kind of band pass filtering. I'm making getting mids from one and getting highs and lows from the other.
Oh, cool.
It's something that an amp really can't do.
Yep. I found adding a clean boost in front of the ADA really helps just give it a little bit of a pop, a bit of a plosive around the front end of the note as I was playing. That was something I was pleasantly surprised, because it just sounded a bit flat when I was playing with it. And I was looking at all the pedals and going, I'll try and hit it with a bit of a boost. And just a clean boost. Man, that really brought it to life.
Yeah, and it could be that in the other way, or in a similar way, but by achieving it in a different way, that could be helping it sort of punch through that op amp stage as well. You might be getting a distortion characteristic on that op amp stage before it hits the tubes, where you have a little bit more going through it, and like I said, you're kind of powering through that, and getting the attack that you like.
Yep. So Frank, when you're attacking live for somebody, have you had any monumental fuck ups go down where you're just like, oh no, not now, or
right?
Any of those moments?
I haven't really personally, but again, I've been teching for these guys that have seasoned rigs. They know what they're doing, and they usually have good stuff, right? Steve's playing fresh Friedman heads, that Dave just looked at probably before the tour and put new tubes in or something.
Yep.
So the maintenance is pretty good. There was a lot of little nitpicky stuff as we started the tour, because this gear had kind of been sitting for a year and a half. So, you kind of have a buildup of potential, failures. I remember, all of a sudden he grabs a guitar. It's a guitar I used for sound check, and it was fine. the whammy bar is just freely spinning, because they had put on a press fit whammy bar. Maybe it wasn't tight enough, and so at that moment, he goes and whammies it. It skips a thread or comes loose. When I had teched prior for a thing that Jack Blades was at, he turns around, between the songs, takes his sunglasses off and throws them to me, and I just like, I'm like, okay. And I just reached up and grabbed him right out of the air and caught him perfectly. Steve pulled that whammy bar out because he was like, I can't get it to, so he just pulled it out, right?
Yeah.
And tossed it to me. And once again, like heroically, it clips the tent, and I still snatch it out of the air. And some of the guys on the bus were like, yeah, that's a pretty good catch. I said, you got to understand. I said, there's that, like those two catches, like that, those are my only two catches, like out of a million, like in infinity. Like I'm 2 for infinity on that. Why I happen to like all of a sudden become athletic for 3 seconds, I'll never know. But for the most part, that thing would have been in my eyeball. If the Frank that didn't really like sports in school had to reach up and catch that thing. But at least I looked cool, doing it right. Other things like there was a headstock break long before the show started, but wind was blowing. It blows a tarp, like a tent. The guitar comes off. It breaks through the rubber band that's supposed to hold it in place. Noses down, hits the ground. But it was a backup guitar. That's why it's up on the shelf up top. And then I had family in the next city. We went to a Woodcraft. I got the glue I needed, the micro mesh pads. I had it repaired, a couple of gigs later. And then it turned out he made that one back to being his number one instead of his backup because it, the way it played and, something about the PAs or something like that. But so nothing that's outside of my wheelhouse, nothing that was too crazy. That acoustic preamp, when I told you it broke down, I was just able to, I was just able to find what it was in a frantic, root cause, just trying to figure it out. It was something about the DI. It was like an op amp had blown between the 1/4-inch DI and the XLR, so it was distorting. It sounded bad, but if I unplugged the 1/4-inch, which only went to a tuner, the sound came back. So we got through that gig, but then, like I said, the next, gig later is when we brought the Fishman stuff in, and all of a sudden they love it and it sounds better, than what they've been using beforehand. There was one show where I could see sort of a cell tower stuff, up on the top of the bleachers, but a bunch of noise was coming to the rig, and it was that high frequency stuff that I know as like RF interference. There was those kinds of noises, and, whiny, like digital whining kinds of sounds, and nothing. You couldn't do anything. We couldn't figure it out. It wasn't the power wasn't that clean. There was 1 volt potential, between common, but it was like that wasn't it, And so I'm walking around the rack and I'm using my body and I'm going, this is changing it. This is helping it, right? And we're just a wet meat sack is what we are,
Yeah.
But not even touching ground, just being there, just physically being there.
Yep.
So the fix for that night was rotating the entire head rack like 35 degrees.
Wow.
It went down. Yeah.
Yep.
And Steve even said to me, he goes, man, when stuff like that happens, he goes, just call Dave Friedman and tell him, like, you're right, but afterwards I called him and I explained it to Dave, everything that was happening. And he goes, no, that's in the air. You were never going to get rid of it. So there was kind of some, vindication there. There wasn't some magic thing that I was missing, that I forgot to check. Did you put air in the tires? I told you I put air in the tires. There was nothing like that. But those types of little things. Yeah. I'm trying to think if there was anything else. I don't know. Sometimes like line 6 wouldn't switch patches or something, but that doesn't have anything to do with us,
Yep.
It's just weird software updates and things like that. And
Yep.
Steve knows how to, that's the beautiful thing about Steve is he knows how to get through the gig and, make something else happen or kick some different switch. So he has something else that kind of, does what he was hoping that it would do.
Yep.
And so he's able to do that or play with the delays even, there's, I can't get the delay to shut off, but oh well, there's delay now that I didn't want.
Yeah, that leads on to
most little things. Mostly it's little things.
Okay, that just talking about the radio interference, etc. Leads on to a question I got there from Flash Grover, who I believe is Fraser Nairn. I'm not sure if I'm saying his surname correctly. Hey, Frank, love your work. What's the biggest challenge for a 21st century guitar tech?
I might be the wrong guy to ask. I mean, it would seem that, the COVID is our biggest challenge, because if you are working as a guitar tech, you don't have work right now. Or you're just starting to work. These guys are just starting to be able to get back to work. And, there is noise in the air. Like I said, that cell tower noise. I took a picture of it just for fun. I sent it to Dave. I go, look at what I'm looking at, And sure enough, again, stage right, it was coming at us, from that way. Billy Morrison didn't have the noise on the other side of the stage. Who knows? For all I know, it could have been somebody's, down below the stage was running a, spy ring that none of us knew about, was communicating with foreign countries or something. But, whatever it was, I sort of visually identified it with some of that junk up there, that was making the noise. But so yeah, there's noise in the air that there was noise, in the past. We're always resetting wireless frequencies because there's RF in the air everywhere you go, and so every night is a different frequency. Little things like that. But I would imagine booking gigs and staying busy, having putting a tour together, because even Rem, the tech for Steve and Steph, that's why he needed a trusted buddy to kind of be able to come in and fill in a little bit here and there, because sometimes you double book. So I ended up doing the studio work for the Deftones album when the Deftones went and recorded their last album. He couldn't make it. I was in the studio doing the same kind of sweet and tuning like we were talking about, trying to tune up the guitars in such a way that, would be complementary to the album. And those guys were that I consider that fun to do for them, because like Chino's not afraid to play out of tune, and they will create tension, with tuning and squeezing the strings and banging the strings really hard with their right hand. And I love that, because then, but again, the producer would sometimes say, okay, Frank, retune these guitars between takes, get them there. And, every once in a while you'd get a take where I'd say, okay, listen, do exactly what you're doing, but when you get to this chord and you slide up, like, don't death grip that one, and Chino would be like, all right, and he'd do it and he'd play it, and the performance would be good and it would sound better, it'd sound more in tune.
Cool.
But I don't know. I don't know a biggest one. I guess I can tell you people you should ask that question to. Let's put it that way. Who've been doing it longer and who've worked for more in multiple acts.
Cool. I might hit you up later for a contact for Rem and see if he wants to come and have a chat to me. If he's that way inclined. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a great guy, and he's teched for a lot more people than I have.
Yeah, I did meet him briefly, as I said, when I went to the Billy Idol show.
Yeah.
Man, Steve left some all access passes for me at the front, and I had that, and the security guy wouldn't let me out back. He thought I was part of a paid for meet and greet. And I'm just like, I got a different pass to them, and Rem had to come out afterwards and go, "No, man,
sure,
he's cool."
Yeah.
Now you mentioned Deftones. Is Steph using the same gear in the studio? Does he use that big rack, or does he use?
Yeah, I was going to speak to that too. So the answer is yes, except he will hit the cabinets, and they were miking the cabinets. So they were. I think they also took the signal from the Rock Crushers, so that he had it, and he would track it, because again, in the digital realm, we kind of have unlimited tracks. But that would be the difference, is that we had some. You had loud cabinets, mics on them. Maybe as well as the DI signal, where he could mix and match and do what he wanted to do. But you're correct. It is that rig. It was that rig.
Okay.
So that album was recorded that way. Chino's rig, it's basically the same. The Rivera heads and some a smaller complement of pedals.
Yep.
Things like that.
I wasn't sure if that rig was out of necessity to pull off those tones that he's gotten in the studio, and it's like, okay, we need to make this monstrous thing. But when I record, I just go guitar, cable, this head.
Same reason people use the XFX Live. I can get all 115 sounds I want for my any song we might pull out of our arsenal, to play that night, and it's all sitting in one box. But you better believe if I'm going into a studio, I'm going to grab the JCM 800 and this amp and that one and that one. This old cabinet with ripped grill cloth, that sounds magical.
Yeah.
But no, in Steph's case, it's basically exactly that. Yeah.
Cool.
I don't have any visibility. Billy Idol just released an EP. I don't know what, I don't know how they got there. I don't know what that signal chain was like for some of those songs. They worked on a lot of textures and had a lot of different sounds, um, but yeah, for the most part, Steve's rig is his rig. He's always using those amps.
Yep. I do love the Friedman Steve Stevens head.
Mm.
I've actually got a Friedman coming soon, and I've asked to put in a little switch so I can get the voicing of his amps if needed.
Yeah, great. That's great.
Yeah, it's just a thickness about it and a sweeter top end than the BEs, the standard BEs.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, no, I really love it.
I get to, it's only a few notes at a time, but I get to play that rig every day, that we set up for a show. And it's a great sounding, great feeling rig, even into the ears. It's just, and you owe a lot, to those heads. Like I said, if it wasn't the heads, then I could find that sound in the quad cortex, right?
Cool. I've got another question here. I'm not sure if we've really touched on most of it already. How did Frank get to the position he is in? What opportunities did he create to be able to work with the high-level performance that he does? And what can a person do to get to that level?
Well, I was out of the industry for a while. I actually handled investments and insurance and finance and stuff for maybe almost 10 years. I had basically the real job in, starting a family, right?
No.
And yeah. And so I did that for a while, but it was in that season that I invented P-Rails, which brought me back, in to where I could license that design to Seymour Duncan. And then I worked for them for about 6 years before doing Falbo guitars and, of course, moving on to Fishman with the Fluence pickups. But this industry is very small, and it's very interconnected. And so when, obviously, all of the same things apply in everywhere in life, where you're going to make your own opportunities, right? You're going to go and, do your networking or whatever. But I never thought of it as networking, and I gave an interview one time where I was like, for me, it's just when you meet people, be genuinely interested in what they do, just want to know, right? That's the first. If you can get that, if you can have your brain to do that, actually have the desire to know and be interested in what you make someone tick or what they do, then a lot of stuff just comes out of that, because 2 years later you're like, how the heck am I going to solve this problem? And you go, that one friend of mine, he makes rubber molds, that go into this or whatever. But if I did this, then we could have a part that had the, I bet he could tell me the viscosity or the softness of the rubber that we need so that this thing doesn't come loose and whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so you just, kind of always have your eyes and ears peeled. But the other thing is, I've been a person of sort of predictable integrity. I don't know. I hate sort of talking about myself in this way, but you're always going to come across challenges. You're always going to come across somebody who, thinks you stink for some reason, or and sometimes it's them, sometimes it's them. Sometimes they don't like themselves, or they see something in you that they don't like about themselves, and it makes them hate you before they even meet you, right?
Yeah.
And you can't control that, but every time, every time I've been hit with or met with any kind of a challenging situation, what's happened is I've been surrounded by all these people who, they know who I am. They know that they know what kind of person I am. And so I know that sounds more like a sermon than it does an answer to your question. But if you just conduct yourself with integrity and honesty, and you just be who you are, and be a good-hearted person that's always trying to do good by others and leave people better off than the way that you found them, then a lot of times that's what leads you, to the next opportunity. It leads you to be safe. So Rem says to himself, the first time he says, who am I going to get to fill in for me? And he thinks of me. Part of the reason is because he knows, and I was alluding to this earlier, but I didn't touch on it. At that time, it's like he knows that I'm going to do a good job, right? Because I know, I have all the background skill sets to be a tech, right? I build guitars, I've designed product, I know how to run rigs and design rigs and stuff. So I have that skill set in the back, even though I haven't been a techie for 10, 20 years like those guys have. But at the same time, he also knew that I wouldn't just go in and then try to steal his gig or something, So I said, I'm keeping the seat warm for you, right? And so he could have faith in that, instead of some young kid coming in maybe they do a great job, maybe they don't, but then the kid's like, looking around for the next gig or trying to, or even bad mouthing the existing techs, right?
Yep.
So, I haven't been that person. And so that to me has led to a lot of opportunities. But it's also led to, even, like I said, with somebody, you know, if someone's not sure whether they like me or not, then sometimes another person will say, no, this is how he is. And I'll tell you why, and I'll tell you stories, and I'll
Yep.
tell you, how he's treated me. Um, and so that's really true. You can make it, without being that kind of a person. But like I said, if I had to credit anything for being able to continue to do this for a long period of time, it's that.
Yep.
It's definitely that.
Just being easy to tour with is one of the biggest
Yeah.
assets you can have, isn't it? Like, I always bring
And
up.
the studio guys, I'm sorry, I'm going to cut you off. I wasn't, but you'll hear, like, in the sidemen, like the studio guys will say that, more than half of it is being someone that the person wants to come in the studio and have on their track, right?
Yep.
It's creating those relationships. Anyways,
Yep.
go ahead. So.
Yeah. I was going to say, I saw a documentary about Ginger Baker, the legendary drummer from Cream.
Mhm.
Great drummer. The guy was an absolute fucking tool of a person.
Right. Sure.
And he couldn't get a gig. He could not get a gig. No one wanted to work with him. It doesn't matter how good you are. If you're not a good guy, no one's going to want to hit the road with you. And when I had Pete Thorne on here, and he gets some really cool gigs, and we sort of
absolutely
busted it down, and it was just like, he's not tight. He doesn't have wife and family at home, and he can just jump on a plane at short notice and go, yeah, I can be at that gig. But just a pleasant guy to be around. Yeah.
Yeah, I've never not wanted to hang out with him.
Yeah.
So that I think, like I said, that has to do with a lot of it. The other opportunities, and things like I said, I invented something. So I can't offer you a substitute to that other than invent something and go, license it to a company so that you start getting into the business in that way. But otherwise, yeah, I wish I had. There's no magic button on it. And most techs, if you talk to them too, they'll say they kind of fell into it. I had the luxury of kind of going straight to a cushy, slot, with people like Steph and Steve. But, I don't know that I would have wanted to do it if I had been starting, in a van job, band or something like that, because I could have done something else instead. But if you're young and this is an industry that you want to get into, well, then of course, yeah, find a smaller band, find somebody doing a smaller tour, offer to tech for them for less money than it would take to tech for Metallica or Megadeth, and then you can be doing it. You can do it for a while, and you can then, parlay that, kind of work your way up the food chain. For me, I'm not really interested in that. I'm not teching for Steve so that later on I can figure out how I can be able to tech for, for the Rolling Stones or something like that.
Sure.
That's not really my thing. I do have a family at home. We have 4 kids, and I have this business that I run. So for me, this is the sweet spot.
Yep.
Teching for Steve, they don't go out that often. Sometimes they do acoustic duo gigs. I'm the guy on that because I'm Steve's guy. But for the most part, it's an easy thing to work into our lives as a family. The longest I was gone was maybe 3 weeks. That was hard on the family to be gone for 3 weeks, but we pulled it off. I got a solid base, right? We've been married 25 plus years, and so together for 30 years almost now. My wife and I have been together, so that sort of mirrors the bachelor life too, where you don't have anything tied down. You can either have a strong foundation or you can have nothing tethering you down, and it probably works for either one. Somewhere in between, if you have a tumultuous, marriage, and
yeah, a bit of a break. Yeah, I actually toured with some guys. I toured with some guys years ago that really enjoyed getting away from their families, and I was sort of thinking,
right.
Oh, okay, and we go to these.
There's a guy on the tour, and he says, he had worked for Sweetwater. He'd done, other things with his life, and when they became as they started to become empty nesters, he toured, and he was like, oh, it's a joke, of course, but he says it saved my marriage. You know what I mean? Because about the time when she's like, get out of here, I need some time away from you, go on tour.
Yeah.
And it just kind of worked out, for him. Like I said, it's a joke, of course, but
Yeah. Yeah.
but it worked out in that he didn't have kids, to take care of at home. And so he was able to do that. We do have some younger kids, but I also have one who's 21 years old. So we can kind of mix it up and have some babysitting, built in and stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was okay for me to take this at this time in my life.
Sure. So I don't have children myself, but I'd be out on the road, and this one particular band, I'd be in some city that I would never normally visit, and I'm like, we're not playing until tonight. Sound check's pretty late. I'm going to go explore the city. Who's coming? And everyone's like, nah, man, I'm sleeping in my hotel room. I'm thinking,
right.
What a waste. They're going, no, you don't get it, man. I don't get to sleep in, so I'm going to do that right now.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, the tech gig can, like I said, it can start at 7 a.m. even, and if you're driving from one place to the next, then it can be that you're on a tour bus all night. I don't love that, but again, it's Billy Idol. The tour bus is fine. It's not a van. It's a tour bus with all the amenities on it. Some of the guys even have riders. This guy needs almond milk every day for his shakes, and he gets it. It's like it's a very easy group, to get along with. It's. I'm not saying it's cushy. It is a lot of hard work still, so I don't mean to downplay the amount of effort that's associated with it. But it is, we're all right. This is an okay gig to pick up. And it's never too bad. Always in hotels, so you have your hotel room or whatever. It's just the occasional time you might have to drive from one gig to the next gig. But it was only like 2 or 3 times on all these legs that we did with them where there was 2 gigs in a row every day and not a day off in between. So like you said, day off in between, I'm going to visit a guitar store. I'm grabbing Steve's guitar, putting a new 3-way toggle switch in it, and that's how you how do you create the opportunities? There was a store in Alaska, Mammoth, I think, if I remember correctly. It was like, hey, can I come down there and use your bench and buy a 3-way switch? Because this one's not working, in this guitar. And sure, come on down. I spent the day hanging out with him, and I bought an old used Japanese Fender guitar neck from him that I used to have now, just get out there, do your thing, like I said, be interested, in what's going on, and you'll find the opportunities.
Well, it is a great opportunity, isn't it, to actually see some of the world that you normally wouldn't go to and get paid for the privilege. That's
absolutely, yeah. That's the crazy part. I was saying even to the manager, it's the woman who's kind of runs the business side of Idol, and I was like, these repaired the headstock on the one guitar. It was a Godin, and I did it in the hotel room. And I was just talking to her, and I was like, yeah, I'm not sending a bill for a headstock repair. I could, a headstock repair is X amount of dollars. I said, but that's a paid day off. What am I used to do? Say, oh, it's a paid day off. I better be, that means you better let me be by the pool, and then I'll charge you for this thing that I'm going to do, the next day or something. I'm like, it's crazy. Of course, I'll work, and do that stuff on the day off. But I can understand these guys who've done it for 10, 20 years wanting to take a paid day off and have it be a day off. Like you said, they are just like, hey, I'm sleeping in.
Yeah.
So I get it. I totally get that.
Yeah. Frank, I was just looking at my notes as we were talking before, and we were talking about like the radio interference and stuff like that. Power conditioning, is that something that the rigs you work with, do they have power regulators and stuff in there? And how important are they?
Yeah, I think it's important. He had been using a Variac on the Friedmans at some point for a long time, where he was running them, I think, I want to say 118 or something.
Oh, really?
But he did put in a Furman, and we're just using that. So there's a Furman conditioner, and then above it we have another Furman strip that really is just sitting there. We're not really using the power outlets for it. It's just sitting there because it has a voltage readout. And so I'm looking at it, it's 120, 123 in the worst case scenario. But the conditioner's supposed to kind of, even that out a little bit. But then, like I said, the reader is after the conditioner, so I can tell what's really going on. But if anything got too out of whack, it would have been that the conditioner is going to knock it down. It'll make sure it won't get up too high. So there is. Everyone wishes they had. There's a Japanese. I can't recall the name of it, but there's a box that Angus Young has.
I saw that. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, you could hook up a Firefly's butt to the back of it, and it'll still power up your whole rig.
yeah.
Or you could get hit by a Thor lightning bolt. And it'll still just give you that 118. Or 120 or whatever you set it to. But nobody justifies that. It's a tough one to justify. It's many thousands of dollars, just to have this, what looks like a air conditioning unit or something,
Yeah.
to basically give you that beautiful power out of the other side. But we did just do that Jimmy Kimmel show, and that was the first time we didn't have any regard for our power drops. We didn't have our power drops where we have individual things. Like, so Steve's rig is all off of the same power, I can tell you that. So then there's a different distro to Billy Morrison or bass or whatever. So everything from Steve's all comes from there. I could plug his pedal board up front into a closer outlet, but I can't. I run that. It comes all the way back to the rig, and everything's off of one drop.
Is there a reason for that? Does that contribute to better ground loop?
Exactly. Yeah, it just minimizes risk. That's all.
Yeah.
You could do it. You could get away with it. But if everything's off of one source, then it just minimizes that risk. They know that you have some dirty power or voltage potentials, between some stuff.
I'll have to keep that in mind. I've got a really cool multi-core that's got power and MIDI and 5 lines, switching systems, cables and everything, which is great. The fact that it sends power down there as well, so I can run it off the same. I'm going to keep that in mind and utilize that just to,
Yeah, and Steve has big looms that go down there, so I'm running cable that's like, this big around, two of these basically.
Oh, two.
Two of those down there, to the rig, and then there's a big jump, between the two. But so I'm running a lot of stuff, back and forth, but it all takes its power from back at the rig.
Nice.
Yeah.
I've had somebody throw in a question there. Favorite guitar tones?
Oh my gosh. Well, I love tube tones. And yet I am also a giant fan of King's X. And Ty Tabor uses those Lab Series amps. Now he's on some orange stuff. Those tones are great. I may not try to get those tones from Solid State Gear, but he makes amazing sounds. So as far as Ear Candy, which is on our albums, but as far as, what I like to hear, I love King's X. I love Stevie Ray style tones, a lot of mid gain. I'm not a big fan of super high gain sounds. It's fatiguing to me a little bit. I like a lot of single coil, split coil stuff personally. As a guitarist, though, I'm all over the map. Like I said, I have a million preamps in a rack up there, all these different sounds. My thing was always like I wanted to get every sound. I wanted all the sounds that I want, available at my fingertips. So that's what's been part of my product development life, is that I design a lot of gear. A lot of it is even stuff that I would never use, but I design a lot of different sounding gear for a lot of different types of artists. And so I can be good enough to play anything for like 30 seconds and then I'm out. I'm not that good of a guitar player, but I can pretend like I am for a while. But I can test the gear. I can play, like Mick Thompson and Slipknot for a few minutes, if I have to see if that cabinet is shaking the way it's supposed to shake. And I can play fast for a little while if I have to play fast. But yeah, so I'm kind of like the fan of all different kinds of guitar tones. I actually love a lot of different sounds. It's hard for me to pin that down.
Yeah. It's funny you're talking about not really liking too heavy a guitar sound. Man, a lot of guys use a lot of gain, too much gain, I'm finding.
And that's kind of a pet peeve for me in like a bar or club band. It's like, man, you're using twice the gain that the guy did when he made the album.
Yeah.
And that hits my ears a little, that's a little fatiguing. But, I think they'll use it as a little safety net. So, I understand it, it makes them feel better as they're up there being vulnerable, playing to, 100 people.
Yeah.
But you're right. Yeah, I've for a long time I've been a reduced gain guy. I probably played high gain in 1989 a lot. shred it up, crank the gain up to the maximum. But that was 89.
Yeah, but now you've got all these amps, like your 5150s, etc. Sort of take they were like some of the first ones that came out, where it's just a ridiculous amount of gain. I just don't think you need that much.
You don't.
No,
Using
and you
Kettner
lose
heads and amps
clarity.
like that, but yeah.
You lose clarity. I've got a Kemper, one of the stage units recently, there's a lot of gigs around here where you can't use amps, so I'll take that along.
Right.
And I tried going through thousands of profiles trying to find the right ones. And when it came time to getting the high gain stuff, I just found there's no definition in that. I can't make out. It's too chewy, too squishy. So one great thing I find with the Kemper is I can take an amp, and I think I'm using, I bought an AC/DC pack by Top Jimmy, and it's the same profiles that one of the guys from the Alice Cooper band's using. And you get that AC/DC kind of gain, but then with the Kemper, you can crank the gain 100%. And give it more gain than what that amp would normally deliver.
I couldn't agree with you more.
And I'm finding I like that much better, to take that style of amp, give it a bit more gain than it normally would, than using, I've got a Bogner Ecstasy one there, I've got 5150s, etc. Yeah.
I'll send you some profiles that I made, and I did them with preamp combining. Again, out of one speaker.
Yeah.
But multiple gain stages, like I said, where a more saturated mid-range and less distortion on the highs and lows. Even some that combine like a hair of the Rockman distortion generator, where you don't really hear it in there, but it's some glue that kind of holds it together. But I will tell you this, that was where I learned, one, by making a profile lower gain, like you said, using the gain knob on the Kemper to interpolate what would happen if I gained that amp up. That was the Kemper is like, it's smarter at doing that than it is at taking a capture of an extremely high gain amp, right? Or maybe it's smarter from a processing standpoint, but it sounded better, right? It was improved sound. So I liked that better. But then the other thing that I was able to figure out was the limitations of the capture from the Kemper, because once you had like a very dense sort of multi-gain composite setup, the Kemper would homogenize that back down into like a sound, but it would still be a little more dynamic than if you didn't do it that way. So I created this patches that, again, you can roll your guitar volume down, and it's a little bit more dynamic through that whole range. And I'll send them to you, or send you a link. I don't know.
Please do.
They're somewhere. But so it was interesting that I could simultaneously like figure out how to sort of expand the dynamic range of the Kemper, and then realize like the limitations. Like I had some sounds where you had almost a clean sound living in with the dirty sound, and that was gone in the profiling. It wasn't even there. But the refinement procedure is obviously critical, because then I could just sit there and just work on that in that refined setting. String raking a lot, just like Stevie Ray style stuff where you're like, man, that cabinet's doing something and the Kemper didn't learn it yet, and so you got to spend the time when you're making the profiles to mess around with that stuff. But once you had that dialed in, like I said, if I take that gain above 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, then there was some really great sounds in there.
Cool. And I take it you've tried all the various modelers, Helix, Axifex, etc.
Yeah.
What's your favorite out of them?
The Kemper. Once I started to be able to do that stuff with it, I was like, okay, I can live with this. The newest Axifex is great. The Quad Cortex is great. I haven't gotten into like multiple signal paths. I haven't really done anything with the Quad Cortex except listen to Steve use it and sound check with it. So I haven't been the guy behind the wheel on that. But if you can take some of that model, if you can do amp combining within a modeler, I think you can stretch it out too. If I have two signal paths like the Quad Cortex would boast to be able to do, if I could take two signal paths and I've got two amps and one's like a cranked up Fender and the other one's not all the way dirty Marshall or something, if those two things are able to live together, the test of a piece of gear like that often is in the digital domain. Do those two things live together in the way they would have in an analog domain, or is there a lot of commonality? So not to diss the amps at all, but like Yamaha had those modeling amps that were kind of a outgrowth of the little ones that they had. The little whatever that THRs or something like that. And they had like 2 amp channels that you could have on at the same time. I spent some time working with that, and by the time you combine those two, there was almost no. You just were listening to like one model that where you push the sound a little bit in one direction or the other, and that's because it's just the way that they're creating those sounds, right? There's a homogeneous nature to that, and so it didn't really do that. It didn't open up the dynamic range. It didn't open up the sound for me, at least. But on the Kemper, like I said, I was able to stretch it a little bit, and hopefully the Quad Cortex gives you that ability.
Nice. I'm yet to play with the Quad Cortex. I've had all the others, and
Yeah.
I've gone for full circle and come back to Kemper. One thing I do notice, though, as opposed to a real tube amp, what works well on a bridge pickup might sound completely terrible as soon as you go to the neck pickup, and that won't happen
right.
on the tube amp.
That's correct.
Yeah, and I don't know why that is, and
It's
there's
the
even
same
some of them.
reason. It's the same reason that a drive pedal in front of a modeler doesn't behave the same. It's because the modeler is putting ones and zeros. I know it sounds cliche, but the modeler is applying an overlay. It's applying a process to the sound that you're putting into it. If I drive a tube amplifier with a boost pedal or a drive pedal or something like that, I have interplay. The electrons come in, they're still in the analog domain, and they change sort of what's happening with the tubes. It's this reactionary thing. And so, yeah, like you said, if I just put up this sort of 2D image on top of that bridge pickup and I switch to the neck pickup, you're right. An actual tube amp would be somewhat adaptive, in nature to the sound that it was receiving on the front end. And I find that the modeling stuff doesn't do that, or doesn't do it to as great of an extent. I don't work for one of those companies. Maybe the guys, if someone was listening to me from Kemper or from, Neural right now, they would be like, no, it does. We actually programmed that in. You're dead wrong. We have algorithms for that. And that's, that may very well be true. And so, like I said, I'm not dissing it, but that's the only way I can explain it, right? Is that you have basically a cutoff between your AD converter and what's happening in the modeler. You have basically like a brick wall. And if you put a tube screamer in front of that, it's not doing the same thing. It's not a pass through.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have the sound of a tube screamer and you have the sound of a Marshall modeler overlaid on top of it, not mixed in with it, not reacting to it. Especially not part of the biofeedback loop where you're standing in front of a 112, letting a note ring out. It's definitely been cut off, from that. That's to say that you can't get that feedback or that feel. It's just different. It's not, it doesn't create the same user experience.
There's a question there from somebody wanting to know your personal string gauge preference.
Since I was a kid, I've always been a light top, heavy bottom.
Yep.
So if it's 9s, it's 9 to 46. If it's 10, it's 10 to 52 or 56. And 11s would be high up into the 50s. But I play a lot of concert pitch, not a lot of E flat or anything. So just like 10 to 52 in E, and that's just been my thing. Now, as time's gone by, there's been people who come out with balanced string sets, like String Source, where they work out so that all the strings are perfectly gauged so that there's the same amount of tension between them. And what we found out was that like a 10 to 46 is actually a little lighter on the bottom, so that a balanced tension of 10s would have been like 48. So then I feel kind of, vindicated that I like 10 to 52, and that I like a heavier bottom, because those always felt lighter to me on the bottom. A 9 to 42 felt lighter to me on the bottom. There was times Eddie Van Halen used 9 to 40. Great, that's his thing.
Yep.
In E flat, no less. But it wasn't for me. I always like a heavier bottom, not even necessarily for drop tuning or drop D, but just, a heavier low strings. And I was talking to my friend, actually the guy who does String Source, and he was like, but wouldn't you want to balance? He's like, this was how he phrased it. He was, in his mind, and he's not wrong, mind you, he says, he's like, he goes, if you're playing a Les Paul with a shorter scale, your Strat, right, 10 to 50, let's say you're 10 to 50, or let's say you're 9 to 46 on a Strat, you should want to be 10 to 52 on a Les Paul or something, right? In other words, wouldn't you want the tension to be the same?
Yep.
And then he was saying, and you have one guitar that's tuned to E, one guitar tuned to E flat, shouldn't you want 9.5 on the E flat guitar, right? Or 10.5 on the E flat? And I was like, no, because for me, this is just me. And we boiled it down to like, it might be because I have, pitch, he'd call it perfect pitch, but like I have that in me. It might be that when I hear that sound, like I don't like using drop pedals either, right? Like a thing that's going to drop me half
Yeah.
step.
Yeah.
Hate it. Because the interplay, right? Like if I grab a Strat with 10 to 56 tuned to E standard, it's because I want to feel that way. And if I put that guitar down and I grab the Floyd Rose guitar with 9 to 46 tuned to E flat, even, I want that to feel that way. Like when I play an E flat, whatever the string gauge was, it should feel slackier in E flat to me. If I hear the E flat as the note, the string should be easier to squeeze, right? That's just what my brain does, So that's, like I said, balance tension I like. So I can still play balance tension. I like that. If something is 9 to 44 and they have like a half gauge in there somewhere in between, that doesn't bother me. That feels kind of good to me. But normally, no, a progressively heavier bottom is what feels good to me. And I've been into multi-scale guitars since Novak came out with them in the 90s. I was friends with him back then. And we used to talk about all this stuff, the clang tone and all the theories behind it. And so I was good buddies with him, and I loved multi-scale guitars, even made some of my own back then. That always made sense to me. Again, as a light top, heavy bottom guy, I'm like, no. Give me more tension, give me more length on the low strings than I do have, on the high strings. So that was what my
cool. Now you mentioned that the whole drop pedal thing. I bought the whole Variax set up about maybe 4 years ago or something, thinking this is going to be great. I play with that many different artists.
E-flat.
I play with that many different artists. This band likes to tune normal. This one's a tone down. This one, I thought one guitar. What I didn't count on was the fact that you hear a lot through bone conductivity.
Oh yeah. Yep.
And if you're wearing earplugs,
coming in here, right?
I'm hearing this dissonance. And I can remember doing a drop D tune, and I want everyone out there to try this. Tune your guitar like standard, and then try and play as if you're playing in drop D, and feel it. Feel that dissonance in your fingers. Yeah. Right?
Yep.
I'm playing with this band, and I'm doing a rehearsal, and I'm just looking at the guys going, sorry, guys, I butchered that. I don't know what I was doing wrong. And they're like, going, it sounded fine. I'm going,
right.
No,
it was out of tune.
I don't know what I was doing wrong there. They said, no, it sounded right.
It's even down to the temper tuning. Like how, people are like, shouldn't use compensated nuts or whatever. Like, yeah, I get it. Compensated nuts are cool. And they actually do work. But I've been playing my way long enough that I've got to squeeze, we change how we squeeze notes as well, because we're listening for, especially with distortion, like you say, we're listening for those notes to stop beating against one another. And it's just this innate, bio connection between our, like you said, bone conductivity, everything, even feeling, and then feeling the sound pressure levels from the amplifier, if it's on, or in ears, if you have ears in. But dude, you're totally right. And it's like, you're like, this is out of tune. But you might go back and listen to the track and you're like, no, it actually was in tune. So that's why I'm saying I can't. I would rather spend a second and retune.
Yeah. The other thing that really gets me when I'm wearing earplugs is how loud a pickup selector switch is through my bones. Like when I change pickups, and I'm talking playing at deafening levels, I can hear clear as a bell, tink, tink.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. The other thing that got me about that guitar, and you mentioned playing through using piezo pickups, is that if you're using the trem and you pull back and that trem happens to hit the body, clunk, the hugest clunking sound. Yeah.
And Steve uses his trem on the Floyd with the piezos, but it's recessed and he's never coming in contact, with anything. I'm going to switch. I'm going to run out of battery, so I'm going to pull this, and hopefully you'll still have my audio.
That's fine. That's fine. If it drops out, you can always use the link to come back in. Back. Yep.
And do you hear me now?
I can hear you, yes. Yep.
No?
Yep. No echo either, so that's fine. Gotta love the modern technology. Oh, he's gone. He's gone, but he'll be back. Ooh, has that switched to my laptop camera? Hello, Frank. Let me just add him back
There
in
we are.
there. There you are. Bang. Perfect.
Yeah, back. Boom. Yeah, and hopefully it sounds okay, and you're not hearing your echo, coming at you.
No echo. I did realize as soon
Okay.
as we started that something went amiss. I normally use a hard connection to my internet when I'm doing these instead of Wi-Fi. I tried to do that and it wasn't working. We had our carpets cleaned recently. I think something's been pulled out. So there's been like a hint of like a ring modulator sound on your voice that came and
Oh,
go.
for real?
Yeah, it was at the start. It was there. Nothing to worry about. I would have got
Okay.
you to log out and log back in, but if
All
you
right.
were to look back at this, you'd go, "Oh, didn't know about that," but it
Yeah.
wasn't worth mentioning. Yeah.
So it's not a monk. I'm not like one of those monks who can produce like the multiple tones when I, speak or anything like that.
Is it like you're talking about? But there's a name for that.
Yeah, like I don't know what it is, but
Tuvan
it's
throat
like
singing. Tuvan
something.
throat.
Yeah, yeah. So for those of you listening who are still with us, that's not what I was doing early on. It's an internet-based issue.
Yeah, that is really cool. That style of singing. What's not so
Yeah.
cool is internet issues. Frank, I just want to
True.
ask you about
Yeah.
Falbo guitars, mate. We haven't touched on that.
True.
Yeah, how did you start your own guitar company?
So I had I had an acoustic bridge design that I had long before I went to go work for Seymour Duncan, and it's a unique design that manages torque. It basically undoes the forward torque on a acoustic guitar bridge, and by just stringing it in such a way that introduces the string tension is providing negative torque at the same time. So it's a balanced torque arrangement, and the acoustic guitar top can now vibrate in a uh, more of an excursion pattern, right? It's actually less dipole vibration and more monopole vibration, and that's
Just
usually something that
to jump
yeah.
in there, would that solve the problem what you're talking about? The problem of a lot of guitars developing a bit of a belly on one side?
It does.
It
It
does.
absolutely
Okay.
does. Yeah. Now that's not its main intent,
Yep.
but that is a product of it. But that belly that you see, that when the strings are on acoustic are vibrating, right? They're vibrating like this, so they're actually sort of putting into the top out of phase vibrations. So the area by your sound hole is got some out of phase information than the area behind the bridge. But together they convolute and you get this mix and you get your sound. And that's why when you move a microphone around on an acoustic, there's really thin spots, super boomy spots. I don't have that because my top is vibrating more in sync. Um, and so when I went to Seymour Duncan, they wrote a technology agreement for me, very kindly of them, which was, all the inventions that I had had prior to working for Seymour Duncan belonged to me. And then anything I invented when I worked for them, of course, would belong to them. And that's fair, and that's how it should work.
Yep.
But the acoustic guitar bridge was one of them. And so again, as I was sort of nearing my time finishing up at Seymour Duncan, um, and that doesn't really need a lot of explanation other than to say I'm very innovation forward. I want to see new products, new things coming out. I'm always kind of working on new things. When I started at Seymour Duncan, they were releasing about 5 or 6 new products a year. We went up to about 20 new products a year for the whole 5 years in a string. And then when I left, they kind of gone back down to just a few new products a year, and that sort of fits their appetite. And they are a legacy company; they've been around forever. Most of what makes them top sellers in their industry is stuff that Seymour did, in the 70s, right? I mean,
Yep.
it's that's a lot of what, and I'm not revealing confidential sales information. I can't
Yep.
tell you how many of this one sold versus that one or anything
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
But it's a safe assumption just based on looking at what's going on the internet. If you haven't been living under a rock, that the JBs and the 59s and the stuff that came from their legacy is what is still remains their top sellers today. P-Rails being an exception. For a period of time, blackouts were an exception as well. They sold a lot of blackouts when they came out. And so there have been some breakthroughs, of course. But that's how they do their product development. And so, I came in sort of as a change agent, and I was able to do that for a period of time. But it was starting to just look like, this really isn't the play. And that technology that became the Fluence technology, right? To pass on that was like, man, how do you, where do I go now forward if I'm sitting around thinking that that's the future of pickups, and that's why I work for the leading pickup company in the industry. So it's very, I had to sort of rectify all of that. But the acoustic bridge design was in that technology agreement, but it was also, and this is again completely fair. It was part of like, they would have right of first refusal to use it or something like, those kinds of things, which is again P rails that we license P rails to them, and so it was in that agreement. So if I wanted to see anything done with that acoustic bridge design, just like if I wanted to see anything done with that technology that became Fluence, I knew I'd have to leave the company, and so we orchestrated that. Falbo Guitars comes out. I do the acoustic guitar bridge. It translates to hollow bodies, so I have a hollow body as well. And then I have a unique way that I translate it into solid bodies, where I have a wraparound sort of Les Paul Jr. style, wraparound bridge, where the strings go in and they anchor to the body in such a way that they counteract the forward torque on the bridge studs. The string energy is actually pushing back on the top of those bridge studs.
Wow.
So now the result is like, if to get that magic between you and your sort of Les Paul Jr., if your amp had to be on 7, where I'm giving you that magic at 4. It's
Yep.
it's really responsive to SPL. Takes a little bit less energy to get a longer amount of sustain, and we're driving the body, even though it's a solid body, and everyone will tell you, oh, the wood, you'll hear sometimes the wood doesn't matter or whatever. So it's a solid body, but I'm getting more resonance. I'm driving more vibrations into the body in phase. So the electric guitar solid bodies actually still have a different feel to them. They feel more like, even you could describe it as, a 50-year-old guitar where the wood's kind of been broken in, but I'm able to get you that, out of a brand new instrument.
Nice.
So,
And
yeah.
I was going to ask you about with your Falbo guitars. Is there production models, or is it purely a custom job where people come to you?
Most of what I do right now is custom stuff.
Yep.
A lot of one-offs, and it's because I'm busy with it. So I just get bogged down and busy trying to do 1, 2, 3 special things for different people at a time.
Yep.
So I do take custom orders, and then when time allots, then we'll have the you do the 5-piece runs and 10-piece runs and stuff like that, where you got a bunch of box like Les Paul Jr.'s types, or the offset Jazzmaster types and stuff like that. Sometimes I'll do those in runs where I do put a batch out. But a lot of, I just keep getting inundated with the requests, for custom stuff. So I don't like saying no, because as a product guy, I'm always wanting to do something different,
Yep.
something new. The guy I'm talking to just last night, it's a Louis Vuitton paint job, on a multi-scale guitar. And because a handbag has like leather piping, there's going to be roasted, wood body revealed through the, Louis Vuitton paint job, and maybe some purfling as to mimic stitching and stuff like that. And those kinds of things just get me energized, so I really like doing that. But I really do. I need to, we're talking about it. I need to put out 5, 10 of stuff, at a time, and do some runs and get them out there.
Yep.
Because by all indications, they would sell, if I did it.
And do you have a list of options, or is it purely what you want we'll build? You don't have like a base model? Or...
Yeah, I do a lot of guiding, so people ask me for advice on something. But I do have a full factory. It's CNC, paint booth, all the equipment, everything. So there's very little that I wouldn't be able to do. But if I turn someone down, it's going to be because, it just doesn't fit sort of into my time profile or expense profile, right?
Yeah. You're at the factory now, aren't you?
Yes, and say yes.
I
am, yeah.
Hey, how do you feel about giving us a bit of a look around?
I can. I hope we don't lose battery if I do. But yeah, I can.
Let's try. Let's try.
Yeah, let's try.
Whoops, that's not what I want to see. I want to see that. There we go.
Okay, let me unhook this. And what I don't know is if I can. Let's try to flip this around. Let's see, front camera, and I'm going to switch to back camera. So now you have this, I presume. Yeah.
I've got just a blank screen. Just black.
Okay, give me 1 second. All right, hang on. Now I should be back.
Yep, there we are. Yep.
Right.
That's it, mate.
And so that's what my CNC looks like. It happens to have a jig in it right now for cutting necks.
Nice.
But it's a 40/20 table. Well, you can see this monster bit in there.
Whoa.
That's for carving the back of the neck. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty serious. And some other pretty serious bits in here. And then there's some also like some really little tiny guys, you know.
Yep.
But that's a 21 tool changer. I feel like I wouldn't want to do a CNC if I didn't have the tool changer. I have programs where I'm running, 4, 5, and sometimes 8 tool changes within one program.
Wow.
Yeah, and so that to me is where it's at. I know a lot of smaller luthier shops are working with the individual, like a router head sitting on top of a CNC, a XYZ table, and I don't know. That to me it would be almost like I would rather just route stuff by hand. This way I can sort of design anything I want, and it'll end up, being able to cut it in one operation, just
Nice.
by having a lot of different tool changes and things like that, things of
Yep.
that nature. Let's see. There's a lot of wood over here. A lot of wood over here in bodies. There's a junior style body over there. There's some hollow bodies. Everything looks like it's covered in dust because it gets covered in dust in about 5 minutes here.
Yeah, I bet.
Big old bandsaw that I love.
Uh-huh.
Edge sander. We spend a ton of time on this guy,
Yeah.
just shaping things like crazy.
Yep.
Thickness sander, um, for thicknessing body blanks and,
Oh, yep.
and
Yep.
tops and things like that. This is sort of a neck carving station.
Mm-hmm.
Shinto rasp. I love this tool. This guy here.
Oh, wow.
That will take some wood off fairly quickly. It's like having a bunch of saw blades bolted
Yeah,
together,
right. Okay.
in an X pattern. Yeah, even these little rasps, roto rasps I'll use. Bunch
Yep.
of files down here, but it goes on this stick right up into the headstock, and then I can carve, the neck that way.
So
Um,
you do a lot of hand carving of necks.
I do. I have CNC programs for them, and I do it. But necks are won and lost, in the hand carving. You can't really. People talk a lot about how a machine will pop out a guitar part, and it really doesn't. There's a ton of work that needs to be done after that point. But yeah, a neck you can't get the feel of a neck coming off of a machine. You really just can't. So I do. Yeah, I do a lot of hand carving of necks. This is a junior style that'll end up with 2 Fluence P90s and a Fluence humbucker. That's a limba, like a black limba top, but
Nice.
roasted limba for the back,
Oh,
which is kind of cool. You don't see much roasted limba out there in the world, but sure enough, I have it. And then another buddy of mine, I don't make tellies and stuff,
yeah.
but this friend of mine sent me this like ancient kauri wood, which is thousands and thousands of years old, and said, "Can you please cut me a telly out of it?" And so whatever tree this came from, it's thousands upon thousands of years old. That's a fun one. Baritone neck over here. This is the Japanese fender neck that I got when I was in Australia. I'm refretting that.
I do
And
like
if you
Japanese
guys,
fenders.
oh, they're so great. Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of Japanese stuff in general,
Yep.
but just they put the time into it. I know that can be sort of a gross oversimplification, but if we're making these sort of broad statements about the Ibanez factory, the Fujigen factory, throughout the 80s or whatever,
Yep.
they really did put the time in, and they really just it's like they went to work every morning just trying to really do their best and make the best instruments and design the
Man,
best instruments.
I had a Japanese
And
flatmate for a while, and his attention to detail, he was training to be a chef,
yes,
and he would practice
yes,
every night, and he'd
yep,
sharpen his knives every night. Just the attention to
yep,
detail was just
yep.
ridiculous.
Yeah, and again, you hate to make generalizations; they don't hold true, but in every instance. But it's really just it is a generalization that I can make. After having owned a jillion guitars,
Hmm.
I can tell you, there's something about that. So those Japanese fenders came from that same place. That's the paint booth. I happen to have a guitar in here right now. This is an Ed Klein. I bought a body and a neck from him. It's the Flaxwood people, right?
Look at this.
And yeah, and so hollowed out, in the back, and you put a plate on it. And so I bought a body and a neck from him. I'm painting it. It's just something I wanted to do for myself. But I put in a block of wood to have that bridge that I was telling you about, where I have the negative torque
Yeah.
in the wraparound bridge, and I could do that by buying a blank body from him. Now, sadly, he had actually just recently passed away. I don't know what it was of, but like I said, I was lucky enough to score this from him. He's a great, great guy. So that's me painting that. Here's a bunch of extra paint. I do use for my clears. I use a UV cure poly. So this is my UV curing oven.
Oh wow.
Yep. And so you have 3 bulbs. They're 400 watts. It'd be nice if I had more lights in there, but those 3 bulbs are enough. They do the job, and so I don't have I have no complaints really about it. But that's kind of my paint setup is the UV cure stuff. So and then here's that neck. One thing about that Flaxwood stuff, right, is they didn't have with the neck I got from him had no fret slots, and so
Oh,
I rigged it up. I put it in my CNC. I rigged it everything up, and so now I have the only one with pocket fret slots. So the fret slots stop before the edge of the neck
oh, okay.
for that sort of faux binding thing,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so that's basically now I'm the only guy with one of those.
What did you call that?
Um,
A pocket fret slot.
yeah, pocket fret. Yeah, so that doesn't go all the way to the end. Yeah,
Okay,
so
I've never seen that.
yep. This is one of Mike Inez's basses. We made him signature pickups, and
Cool.
but then on some of his basses, I'll fill in the old pickups route for the soap bar, and then go back and refinish it. So this is kind of in the middle of a refin, where going to kind of try to maintain this reverse burst that he had on there. Buffing wheels, you know how those work.
Yep.
Uh, Turn them on, they spin, they buff stuff out. Um, Drill presses and things. This is buffing frets. Holy cow! So step on this switch,
Yeah.
and that's my wheel for buffing frets. That's a secret. That's my. It's not a secret, but I mean it's like it's a hot tip. That is definitely a secret to getting really high shine on frets. If you tape off the fingerboard, you tape off between each fret, do
Yep.
your polishing work, and then take them to the wheel. It's a huge difference, huge improvement. Drill press from the old days, right? I love old tools. They're just made differently. This thing weighs a ton, and I love it. So I do a lot of small stuff on there. What else can I show you? I have a climate room in the back. So this is where, so we keep the wood, um, like for wood storage, right? Oh, and it's running right now, which you can hear. Hey there, machine. Um, so I'm taking the humidity down, right? So we kind of maintain the humidity in this back room for wood storage, and that's pretty important. So I'll run it. I like to keep it around 40% humidity level,
Yeah.
where I'm storing the wood before it comes out and gets worked with. Otherwise, silly things like a refrigerator, which everyone knows what that looks like. Um, this was a fun project I did. I just kind of got on a whim. I wanted to do. You remember the Kramer Stagemaster?
I don't
It was
actually.
so it was a lot like an ESP Horizon,
Yeah.
but the contours were different. And I had always kind of wanted one, so I just took the time to draw it. It kind of just as a self, teaching exercise. You know what I mean? Just to kind of stretch my skills out. So I drew this actually from scratch, but it's that sort of late '80s Kramer Stagemaster, and the contours are different from a Horizon. So if you looked at them, but there was an old ad with Eddie Van Halen holding one, and not that
Sure.
he played
Sure.
it, but I just thought the guitar was cool in the ad.
Sure. Frank, continue with that little bit of a tour. I just have to take
Yeah,
off for 30 seconds. I'll be straight back. Keep showing us around if you don't mind,
not a
mate.
problem. Yeah. Well, you guys know I said old tools, right? So this is my table saw, and it is a 1971 Powermatic, where at that moment it was their 50th anniversary. So come on, you know what I mean? Like, how cool is that? It's got a new motor, But yeah, so I'm a huge fan of old, old tools that were built right the first time. And I just had a friend drop me off a blast cabinet. Not sure what I'm gonna do with this yet, but these are the things where like you stick your hand in the gloves, and then it does sandblasting, and bead blasting. So I have some glass beads. That's pretty good for like taking paint off of hardware, finishes off of hardware and things like that. So you can have fun with that. What else can I show you guys? If there's anything you want to see,
Thanks, Frank. I'm
type
back.
it in. Yes, I noticed you're back. Um, I was just showing my table saw, which I love. Um,
Yeah,
what
there's something
else?
about favorite tools. People just
Yeah.
fall in love with certain tools, and nothing will replace it, huh?
Yes. No, that's really true. Yeah. 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 Like I said, my table saw is from 1971, and it was their 50th anniversary when it came out. So it was great. Um, here's some Brazilian rosewood back here. That's nice to have. Good work if you can get it.
Nice.
Some figured. I don't know if this will show up on camera. That's some very, very uniquely figured ebony
Yeah, right.
for a fingerboard. Yeah.
Yeah, I've never
And I
seen
have
ebony
a
with a figure
bit of
like
it.
that. That-
Yeah, you don't see it very often. Here's some more figured ebony, right? So that is going to be a blast to make some fingerboards out of that. But other than that, it's a typical shop.
Nice
Not
one,
that
mate.
y'all want to see me, but I'm going to turn the camera around again.
Yep.
Let's see, front camera, done and done.
There
There, you
you
got
are.
me again?
Yep, got you again.
All right.
Nice.
There I am. Yeah.
All right.
There's
So
the ceiling.
now you mentioned some roasted woods along the way. What are you
Yeah,
finding roasting wood? And that's a very popular thing at the moment. What does that
it
bring?
is. It
What
is.
does that bring to the table?
So when you roast it, if you do it right, what you're getting is you're ridding the wood of the cellulose and hemicellulose. You're cooking that off, but it's also a big reduction in lignin, which is the sort of a binding agent, if you will. And so if a piece of wood is what we might refer to as over roasted, whether it means the temperature was too high or it was cooked for too long,
Hmm.
then what happens is it becomes very brittle. And so what you have to do, in my experience, is find the right balance. So I have some suppliers that I use. One mainly, if he has it, I'll get all my roasted woods from him because he is very good at. Um, I mean, first of all, very good at selecting the wood even before it goes into the oven, but also all the big differences between the temperature and the duration, like the peak temperature, duration, how it cools off. He has all that stuff dialed in for each species, and it's for a guitar. So if you go to like a wood store and they have something called tempered or whatever, like uh, maple or something sitting there or whatever, in my experience, you just don't know what you're going to get. So
Uh-huh.
that's why I've kind of I kind of stick with who I with who I trust. So if it's done right, then you get the cool. You're trying to approximate an old piece of wood that has since had all of its moisture sort of like leave the piece of wood naturally,
Yep.
right? And all the cellulose and hemicellulose has broken down naturally. But again, if we push that process, we can get to a place where it's now brittle and
I'm glad you brought that up.
cool.
I've
Yeah.
got a guitar there with a roasted maple neck, and
Hmm.
the amount of dints I have in the back of the neck
Oh
is
yeah.
ridiculous. I say that.
It's more, yeah.
There's two that I feel when I'm playing, and one
Okay.
was I just gotten the guitar and I gave it to a friend to have a play, and he leaned it up against this chair I'm sitting on actually, and,
You're
and
right.
just the back of it, um, the neck was leaning on it, and every time I play around the fifth fret, I tell you what, I'm cursing that guy because I could feel a dint there, and that got me
Really?
thinking,
Yeah.
man, I thought
Yeah.
roasted maple was supposed to be stable, etc. But when you say that
Yeah.
brittleness,
Yeah. And so what we don't want to do is confuse the term stable with like strengthened, right, or fortified. stable, meaning that when the temperature, or excuse me, mostly when the humidity changes, the tempered wood, right, the roasted woods, they will not expand and contract to as great of an extent. Now, this means you'd never want to necessarily use a roasted maple neck with a raw maple fingerboard, because for their entire life they're going to be doing different things to one another.
Sure.
But ebony already behaved differently than maple did. So actually, a roasted maple neck with an ebony fingerboard, I like it. It seems to work out okay. If I were going to use a rich light fingerboard, right, a composite that has no expansion and contraction, or no measurable expansion contraction under the temperature humidity changes, I would want to attach that to a roasted maple neck, right, or a roasted wood, neck for that matter. So there's times when you also want to be cognizant of the combinations that you're going to do, right? Like I said, roasted and non-roasted glued together, they're going to be doing something different now for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
But they're mated together. If you have a roasted body and a non-roasted top that you've laminated to it, then you can have cupping over time. It's the kind of cupping that you would have if you did a lousy job matching a top to a back, right? This one was just cut off the tree. It's still green. This one's really dry, and you put them together and they do something, different over time. But really it's just, if you have, like I said, if you have a non-roasted and a roasted laminate of some form, then at some point they're going to do different things to one another. And when it comes to laminates too, a lot of people don't realize with guitar building, once you apply wood glue to a surface, that surface expands. And so you can have cupping or growth just from the moisture from the wood glue. Then the glue dries, then the wood shrinks back to its original state before you had applied the wood glue days later or whatever, right? And so that's a problem with building guitars too quickly, right? So you glue it up, you're like, hey, the glue's dry. Okay, I'll put frets in it tomorrow. No, you have to give it time to return back to its moisture state, because you've just introduced moisture into that joint. Or you put two pieces of wood together, in the joint, that joint is swollen up. So then you come and plane it off and make it smooth. Well, right there at that joint, then it will shrink back because that's the part that was swollen, right? So it's almost like if you had a mosquito bite on your arm and then you shaved it,
Okay.
It's like you just removed stuff. Now when that mosquito bite's gone, you have a dent, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of caveats in working with roasted wood. I do like it. I do like the idea of it. You just have to really know what you're doing.
Okay. So you think that particular neck that I was talking about has just had too much moisture removed from it or something?
No, it could just be normal. I don't know. It could just be regular roasting process that was done to it, and it's just, it is what it is. It's a softer piece of wood, or those dents you'd experience even with the wood that I buy from my guy.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
But, yeah. The brittleness is more also that it'll just break apart.
Okay.
Right? So if you have a thin piece of something or whatever, like I can go like this and it's very stiff and it'll snap. And if I have raw maple in a thin strip, I can sit there and bend it and it doesn't snap.
Okay.
So
yep.
Yeah.
Now, as you were showing us around your workshop there, and you mentioned the frets, the pocketed frets, etc. That's what you called it, wasn't it? Pocketed frets.
Yeah.
Do you have a preference for stainless steel or standard nickel? Isn't it? Are they nickel for the standard ones?
Right. Yeah. Nickel silver. As a guitar player, I usually like nickel silver.
Yep.
I own a lot of guitars, so I don't put a lot of playing time on one particular guitar. Much like Steve doesn't play a guitar for more than one or two songs a night. Yeah. So I don't wear my frets down very quickly on specific guitars, but so sonically speaking, yes, stainless steel sounds different. I don't like stainless steel on an acoustic guitar. There have been times when I've done a stainless refret on acoustics because I have friends who will just play the heck out of them and put dents in anything that isn't stainless.
Yep.
In those cases, I do a partial stainless refret. So I am stainless up to like the 10th fret or so before they're going to stop wearing those frets out.
Okay.
And what happens there is obviously the difference between the the stainless and the nickel. You don't hear a difference between those two frets, right? But what is happening on a guitar that has all stainless steel frets, as soon as you hit the strings, anytime you hit a string, the first revolution is going to clank against the fret tops.
Yep.
That's where stainless steel is now making that difference in the sound of the string, which will make its way through electric guitar pickups, and of course is really significant in an acoustic guitar. So on an electric, yeah, on an electric, I don't mind them, and I happen to be stainless as what's going in that Japanese Fender neck. But so I don't mind them, but I guess as a player, I still prefer the regular nickel silver. As time goes by, I have to do more stainless fret jobs on the guitars I build because the customers want that or they're expecting it. So I do build a lot of guitars with stainless frets. The Evo Gold fret wire from Jesscar fits somewhere in between. I really love the tone of that wire. It doesn't have the clank tone of stainless. I really love the workability of it, the way it buffs out. So I really love using it. It's gold in color, which prevents me from using it on certain guitars because it just would look odd,
Yeah, yeah.
But otherwise, yeah, I love that Evo Gold wire. And for any luthiers watching or people who are going to buy guitars from luthiers, there is gold fret wire out there from other sources. And as far as I know, from what my sources tell me, it's not the same as the Jesscar Evo Gold. So if you are looking for gold fret wire, just get it from Jesscar. Jesscar Evo. That's my recommendation.
Cool. Now you mentioned there just the first revolution of the string and creating that bit of a ping, and that just got me thinking. We were talking about tuning earlier. When you're tuning the guitar for someone like Steve Stevens, are you? And we did talk about how you might use a tuner first up and then sort of do some fine adjustments. Are you constantly picking the string as you're tuning it, or do you pick it once and let the note settle and adjust it?
So I'm usually listening for just a few moments after it's been struck.
Okay.
Because when you hit it, it's going to go sharp for a second.
Yeah.
It's going to settle back in. So especially if I'm looking at a needle, I will hit it and wait for the needle to come back down, because for a moment the needle will stay up higher.
Yep.
But if I'm tuning by ear to get to that final point, in most rock songs, the person's right hand is in continual motion.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
We're not just laying a note out and just letting it ring out forever.
Yep.
Very often. So I am tuning for the chordal rhythmic playing of the song.
Okay. I think it was Thomas Nordberg. Is that his name? That Texas. Yeah. That it was saying that he constantly picks because, well, you're constantly playing and it does make it a little bit sharper. And
right.
I've been doing a bit more of that.
Something, to keep it going.
Yeah.
Again, that's not my thing. You know what I mean? But if he means to, again, who's he tagging for? Steve Vai?
Yeah.
When's his right hand not moving, right?
Yeah.
I mean, his whole thing is picking, right? So again, that may be what has served him best in serving Steve's interests, right? As a player. And maybe during all that, he keeps picking, and he maybe he puts the needle dead center there, and then the rest of the band is all in tune to that, and and that's middle for him, is constant picking.
Yeah.
For me, I'm listening for just that moment before it, I should say that moment right after it's sharp and falls back into line.
Yep. Yeah, interesting, because I did start doing that, constantly picking it as I was tuning.
Mm-hmm.
And I got asked to tech for a Bruce Springsteen impersonator a couple of years ago, and I tuned his guitar doing that. And he was checking his tuning as he was going, and he came up to me and said, "Oh, the guitars are all flat." And I'm showing him and going, "No, they're not." And he's going, "Yes, they are." And I had to explain to him, "Oh, no, well, I've tuned it so that as you're strumming, because you're constantly playing rhythm guitar there, that it would be in tune on that initial strike." And I was just interested to see your take on that.
Yeah. And, I will say this, my biases, so where I'm sort of sweetening the tuning, they're all on the side of sharp. So everything is kind of pushed up, as, but like if you hit the low E string on the guitar, it's dead on, right? Yep. But I'm just saying some of those thirds relationships, that I'm trying to dial in between the B and the G string and stuff like that, they're all a little bit lifted. But being done at the sort of more RMS state of the string, if you will, rather than the peak.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Frank, I'm going to take one more question from the chat room there before I round things up, mate. And and this comes from Roma. He wants to know what you would recommend to someone who wants to start building guitars as a side project or a hobby. I guess they
Um,
mean, would you start off with kit guitars? Or would you try and start?
Of course, yeah. The
Yep.
easiest thing is to get bodies and necks from the same source. You don't necessarily want to get a Mighty Mite body and a Warmoth neck. You can; they will go together just fine. But it's nice to start with that. I found necks to be the most difficult. So your next step would be to like start routing a body. Route the pickup cavities and make a body that you can then bolt a regularly available neck onto. That's what I did when I was 15 or 16, would make bodies and put the necks on the bodies. And then it was later that I got into making my own necks. Um, there are a lot of dual action, like two-way truss rods now that are good, that only require a straight routed slot, instead of the traditional truss rod where your slot has to be arched to some perfect arch that's going to match the longevity of the instrument
I
and
didn't
then
know that.
filled in with a curved thing. Yeah, like a traditional Fender rod, the channel is arched, the rod is straight. They press the rod into the curved channel. They put a filler strip on top that matches the curve, the negative of the curve, so that when you tighten the rod, it brings the neck straight.
Okay,
A
I didn't
dual
know that.
acting truss rod, yeah, a dual acting truss rod is a stationary one on top and one on the bottom that's moves in and out, and so they're working against each other,
Yep.
and so you can route a straight channel. So again, that's one of the easier things. You can buy pre-slotted fingerboards all day. Instead of like me, I cut my fingerboards on the CNC, including pocket frets and everything, and
Yep.
I'm making pocket frets that match the radius of the top of the fingerboard. And I use a very complex compounded radius fingerboard surface that I designed that sort of gets a little flatter as you go up, but has a little fall away, a little bit of massaging on the higher frets, higher strings. So I have all this stuff, but then I can do a fret slot that mirrors that, that matches that, instead of a saw blade just cutting a barbaric straight line,
Sure. Yeah.
across.
Yeah.
And that can strengthen the fingerboard to have that arc, in the
Okay.
fret slots. But for a hobby builder, yeah, the first fingerboard you use, you shouldn't slot those fret slots. It's too much of an exacting process. It's going to be very difficult for you to buy all the equipment and start, get a saw blade and stuff and solder. So buy a pre-slotted fingerboard or two. Get going on that. If you've never done fret work, start out with refrets. Refret your inexpensive guitars. Refret your friends' inexpensive guitars if they'll let you, and then work your way up, and then you can fret the guitar that you're building.
Cool.
Um,
Now, speaking of frets, um,
mhm.
and fret slots, is that something that there's a universal formula that everybody uses that says this is where it should go, or have you calculated something yourself? Now, the reason I ask this is
Yeah.
back in my days as a Brian May impersonator, I had the Red Special guitar that I go out and tour with,
Okay.
and
Okay.
I kid you not, that is the only guitar that I could play "We Will Rock You" and play the high A shape on and have that
Okay.
perfectly in tune. Any other guitar,
Wow.
no, you got that slight bit of dissonance happening. And
Wow.
I know that Brian and his father calculated the fret positions themselves because it's an odd
Right. Yeah.
scale
It's
length. I can't
mathematically.
remember exactly what it
Right.
is. And
That's
it's
right.
like, man, you are one smart guy because that is perfect right there. Is
Yeah.
that something you do yourself or do you use a
Well,
universal formula?
yeah. I mean, the fret slots are all based on a rule. You know what I mean? I have, I don't modify the main rule. Let's put it that way. I'm using that, but it's a mathematical calculation, and you lay them out, and the only thing that occasionally I will do that could be considered compensatory is that on the nut, when it comes to the nut slot, the bias on the nut slot is slightly forward. It's slightly sharp, but we're talking about to the thickness of pieces of paper, right? Um, but that's a little bit of a bias because we all come to the understanding that we're not, and I'm not a fan of zero frets personally, but we all come to the understanding that the nut slot itself, whether it's because of the curvature of the neck or because of how deeply you cut the slots, it's just a little easier to pull sharp down there in the lower register than it is as you walk up the neck. Even though the strings begin to get higher off the board, we now have compensation from the bridge that's now becoming a greater percentage of the string length in its total, right? In other words, if I could play an infinite fret way up close to the bridge, those intonation compensations would be their strongest. Those deltas would be the most there. And when
Okay.
I'm down at the first fret, those adjustments at the bridge are having the smallest impact, which again sort of speaks to a compensated nut. Although I just don't think it's often or always needed, you know. But it's not a bad thing. Compensated nuts aren't a bad thing. But I'll also do a little compensation just with like how I cut the slots. You know, like I may have just I may be a little sweeter on the G string than I am on the B, and it's not something you feel when you squeeze the strings down. But I know that I've just given you like a cent or two, a cent or two of a bump, when
Yep.
you're doing those D-shaped chords, some of that stuff, right?
Yep.
Um, I don't know.
Cool.
Those are just little things that I maybe did to a few of Steve's guitars or whatever.
Yep.
Some of my own guitars.
Nice.
But no, for
I
the
ha-
most part, it's math. Yeah, it's math. Because we can't temper a guitar unless you do the true temperament frets
Yep.
where they're all squiggly.
Yep.
If you're not doing that, then you're going to only be biasing towards a certain key, right? A key signature that you're going to play in. So
Okay.
absent that, we know that guitars just have to be sort of boxed, put the pitches have to be put into boxes, and then you as a player have to work within that.
Sure. Sure. I have one more question for you,
Sure.
and you mentioned something about different woods earlier, and it brought to memory for me the first time I had you on, and we had Remco on. We talked about tone woods, and I can't remember who. One of you guys was dead on that. No, that's just rubbish, and the other guy was like, no, it's
Right.
absolutely a thing. I forget who was in which camp. What was your take on that?
Can you guess?
Are
Yeah,
you a yes for tone woods? No.
I am a yes, and I fully acknowledge that most of what people call experiments out there on the internet are nothing like what an experiment is. You have people who will play a guitar and then saw off half of the body and say, "See, it still sounds the same."
Yeah.
None of that stuff takes into consideration the sound pressure level from the amplifier coming back at you, and they also don't usually play the guitar in such a way as to show you the differences between the sounds. In other words, they'll pick some very clinical chord progression and they won't have a very active or dynamic right hand, and they'll say, "See, this sounds the same as that. The ash sounds the same as the mahogany."
Yep.
But if I took a swamp ash Telecaster and an alder Telecaster and I went up near a Fender style amplifier that was cranked up, I could play them in such a way that I could show you the differences, right? I could say, "See, this one is doing this thing more easily." Or when I play it like this, I get this kind of attack out of it. And when I play that one like that, the same way, I get a different style of attack. Can you tell the difference now? And then usually someone will say, "Okay, I can hear it." What's inarguable is everybody's going to have a difference of opinion as to how valuable that is. Somebody might say, "I don't care. I picked this guitar because it was pretty and it sounds fine to me." And I have no qualms about that. I'm not the kind of elitist who's going to be like, "You should know that Spanish cedar is better than the old, Honduran mahogany at this, blah blah blah." The African mahogany is different, and I don't expect anybody to care to the level that I care,
Yep.
but I can show people those differences and those deltas, and some of the differences I get if it turns into some online argument or something. There's times where I have to say, "Look, I can't tell you some of the stuff that I've done because I'm under contract with different R&D companies where I've done things that have been associated, whether it's with pickups or whatever. I've done things and I can, if somebody wanted to pay me to conduct an experiment and show you and prove to you these things, I can do that." But absent that, this is the internet. I can just tell you I know, and I know what I know, and I know why I know it. And you can just go on and not believe me if you don't want to.
Yep.
But yeah, the main thing is, the strings are attached to the wood on either end. People will say, like the default arguments are that a pickup hears magnetically, so how can it hear the wood? Well, the string is vibrating on both ends. It's vibrating the wood, and so again, you have this biofeedback loop between the wood, the bridge, and the strings. Yes, it's even true on a Floyd Rose, and we can show that to you. I have ways of showing it to you. Like, it's two knife edges. Who cares what the heck? No, there's a difference. And so someday, who knows? Maybe someday. No, no one's going to pay for this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Just for fun. Right?
Yep.
and put it out there. But someday, if the time ever came, then I can kind of show you why I know what I know. But it really does make a difference. And a good explanation is, if I made the guitar from rubber, you'd be able to tell, right? The string, the attack, everything would be different.
Sure.
To that, people will argue back, well, as long as the wood is kind of hard, it's going to be the same. No, it's not. But if something makes a difference, if I expand the deltas, if I show you extreme differences and that sounds different, then somewhere here there's still a difference. It's just whether you care or not. That's all.
Yep. Well, I'm a Stratocaster guy, and I've got several Strat style guitars, and if I just acoustically go past and go jing, jing, jing on them all, I can hear the difference between an ash Strat, an older Strat, basswood Strat, and all those things that they talk about. Man, I hear the difference acoustically that is being picked up through the amp. Just the ash has more of a scooped mid sound, like more highs, more lows. The older Strat just has this thrust in the mid range. I've got the basswood one that's a throw together Warmoth. I'm not happy with the sound of that. My Hamer, which is mahogany. Oh man, the low end on that. It's just, and that's got a Floyd Rose,
But still,
it's got chunk.
And they were using great wood back then. You know what I mean? They picked good pieces. You knew you were getting something good. So I mean, I could make a guitar today out of various types of African mahogany that aren't advantageous for a guitar. They're just they're decent, but it's not that magic that we're talking about. That one.
Yeah, absolutely.
So actually, another friend of mine, I'm making him a Spanish cedar guitar with that in mind. If you find the right pieces of Spanish cedar is not a cedar. It's actually more of a cousin to mahogany than it is to cedar. But they just call it Spanish cedar, right? It's tastes like chicken. But they and it smells. It has a really great scent to it.
Nice.
But that's what somebody is it pronounced Rokangas? Will use. I believe some of those guys will use that as their substitute for Honduran mahogany, like a real genuine Honduran mahogany.
Yeah.
Because even Honduran mahogany, we don't get it today. If you buy something that says Honduran mahogany or Honduras mahogany, it's generally grown in the Philippines or somewhere else. It may be the same seed, it may be the same tree style, but different soil, different climate, and it's just a little bit different, in the way it performs. But it's not the same. All that stuff is very different from the African mahogany, the Kaya. And you can make great guitars out of that. But I just find I may sort through, a ton of African mahogany before I find something that I want to use.
Sure. Now, acoustic guitar, it's most definitely makes a difference, doesn't it?
Of course.
Yeah. There's a couple of well-known Australian guitar builders over here. I'm thinking Maton and Cole Clark guitars. And I've got a friend who's got, several really nice guitars. Taylor's, Takamine, etc., and all the Australian ones. If I'm at his place and he picks up one of the Australian guitars, I can hear it straight away. I just go, that's a Cole Clark or a Maton, isn't it? And he's like, yeah. It just has such a pronounced mid-range about it. I'm not sure if that's because of the woods that they use over here.
Right.
Our woods.
Yeah, there's a lot of woods that are native to you guys that those builders will use. And so that can be and is usually, a big part of that. In the Cole Clark case, they have a very sort of different way of making the guitars. So they'll put the sides will go into the top and binding is different. And, so they have a sort of a different way of constructing the guitar to where maybe a Cole Clark that was made with spruce that we found in northern Italy, and Brazilian rosewood or Indian rosewood, that an American builder would be more prone to use might still sound like a Cole Clark. Because there's some significant differences in the way they produce the guitar. But you're right. There's Tasmanian blackwood. These things are nice. They're nice woods, but they have a profile.
Yeah. And it's like you've got an equalizer set around 1K that's set with a very wide Q, and that's just right there. And for me in a studio, that's vocal space, man. I like to pull a bit of that, bit of that out. So
that's what I'm doing with my acoustics. The Helmholtz resonance of my acoustic box, right? with the way I have the bridge and the way I have the bracing, which by the way, for me, I have no bracing behind the bridge at all because I
Oh,
don't
really?
need it. Yeah, because I'm not torquing forward, right?
Sure, sure. Yep.
So the Hemels, the resonance of the box, if you compare it to a comparably built like a Martin style bracing version of the same exact guitar, I'm down by about a step or a step and a half. So I have a lower resonance, like a lower subwoofer sort of woofing sound,
Yep.
if everything else were to have been equal, right? And because of that, when you think about a Martin style guitar, if you're really in the studio, there are, and it's engineers will be very quick to do this, but you're really spending a lot of time shaping that Martin style guitar around 175, 100 hertz, even into 80, 250. You're doing a lot of sculpting, or you're doing creative miking techniques to sort of give you the sound that you want. But there's a lot of stuff that has to be sort of fixed for modern consumption about a Martin style sounding guitar as it records, to track. Maybe not in the room, maybe not the campfire version of the Martin guitar, but the recorded version, right? And so there's all this stuff that they do. And so my guitars are sort of doing that inherently. It's been what I've been able to do just by that design. So now like I said, my low frequencies are shifted just a little bit lower. My lower resonance kind of gets out of that area where, like you say, is now piano space, or my Les Paul player is occupying all that 300 and 250 and whatever. And
Yep.
there's all this build up there. I still have information present there, so you can do what you want, but it's just contoured in such a way that sort of lays down in a track a little bit nicer.
Yep. Yep. I get a few people asking me, oh, yeah, what acoustic guitar should I bring for the session and blah, blah, blah. And I always say, if you've got a few, bring them, because depending on the track, is the track just acoustic guitar and vocal? Well, we're going to need something that's going to take up the high and the lows.
That's right.
Have you got a big dense mix where you've got layered guitars and everything? Well, you want something that's a little bit more boxy, that's just going to find its own little space and poke its head out there. And I actually had a bit of a shootout one time. I had about 10 acoustic guitars here, and my friend has this Koa Taylor.
Okay.
The low end on that thing, I don't know what the hell's going on there, but it has just got this whole octave of frequencies down low that just isn't present on any of the others. And you feel it as soon as you strum it. It's just,
that's whoa.
Great. Yeah. And that's going to be useless for some things, but absolutely perfect for others. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah. It depends on, like you said, it depends on what it is. If you listen, even that Jimmy Kimmel broadcast that you listen to, they use the skinny Godin acoustics, right? Where they're just mostly piezo. But that was the first night that Billy used the Aura, and they're panning that acoustic a little bit more right. Steve Stevens' guitar is a little more left, and we got that thing sitting just right there. There's a lot of chime, a lot of strum, but if you listen, it's not that there's a bunch of reverb on it or anything, but there's a liveliness, like there's a 3D depth to that acoustic sound. If I isolated it, would it be the kind of sound you'd want to play a James Taylor, song on?
Nope.
No, but it's perfect for not just for that mix, but for how boxy those mixes can be for when they basically multiband compress them for broadcast. It turned out to be, it's great. So you're right. We're always asking something different, of an acoustic guitar depending on the situation. Where it has to basically get out, get out of here. You know what I mean? Yep. I'll take you in the treble. I'll take your pick attack. I'll take all that stuff. But you got to give space to, like I said, to a Les Paul style guitar. A humbucker style guitar, if that's in the mix with you, and natural piano is in that song. So you got to, like I said, you got to create space, and I think they did a great job. That was not like that wasn't our guys mixing it, right? That was all Kimmel.
Oh, cool, cool.
Yeah, and I think it sounded great.
Nice. Now, somebody's asked what your favorite strings are. We did talk about your preference and gauges and everything. Did you mention a brand along the way?
No, Diodario has always made good strings. Like I never have a complaint about a Diodario string. I don't like the NYXLs. They feel tactile. I don't like how they feel to me. But like a Diodario XL is great. The string source is making those balanced tension strings, and the strings are also very, very good. So it's not just the technique of gauge selection. He makes a good string. And nowadays, we've gotten to the point where a lot of the strings are good, otherwise they just wouldn't be around. Yep. So there's a lot of good stuff. Steve is using Ernie Ball. I feel like the Ernie Ball acoustic and possibly the electrics. Like they'll die a little quicker death for me than in like a Diodario XL. That's irrelevant to a touring guitarist like Steve. We're replacing the strings. We're not trying to have them break. You
Sure.
know, to
Yep.
someone like me, where like that rose-colored Strat has probably had the same strings on it for over a year. Then that becomes something that I care about.
Yep. Yep.
If you have one or two guitars and you're going to change strings every couple of weeks, it's not part of your. It's not even in your in your thought
Sure.
process at all.
Do you have any thoughts on coated strings?
I like the D'Addario versions the best,
Yep.
where they're coating and I haven't tried. I'm gonna rewind this. I
Yep.
still haven't tried their latest. Okay, so their newest one is supposed to be improved, and I do want to try it. But D'Addario's EXPs were coating the wire before they wrapped it, and
Oh.
that to me felt better.
Yep.
So like an Elixir or these strings that have coating all the way across them, then I can't stand them. They feel slippery to me. I lose all tactile sensitivity, so I don't like them.
Yep.
But when you make guitars as a brand, like if I have a guitar that's going to sit in a store hanging on the wall for sale for a month or two, then you don't have a choice. You got to use a coated string, because two or three people will put their different acidity on the strings and kill them in a
Yeah.
second.
Yeah.
And then that guitar on the wall, the people go, "Oh, that one stinks. I think this other, this guitar is better." And really, this might just be that it has new strings, fresh
Yeah.
strings on it,
Yeah.
or a coated string. So coated strings are something you have to use in life. Um, like I said, for retail and things like that. And some
Yep.
people are very corrosive, so they need them, and that's where I think the D'Addarios have been my favorite. They sounded the most natural as well.
Yeah.
The
Right.
D'Addario, when another Australian, Adam Miller, would talk about how when they do finally die, they die a hard death fast. My theory on there is that if you have a coated wire and you're raking a wrap with it,
Yeah.
then between the wraps, if you have a micro layer of that coating that begins to break down, then instantaneously it's going to turn into debris between them. And you take the dead strings off and they feel real slinky, almost like the wraps have become looser.
Okay.
And so I think that's based on the coating in between them kind of breaking down.
Yeah. Right.
But their new I'm anxious to try D'Addario's new coated string to see if they've modified that process a little bit.
I'm gonna have to try those. I've been using
Yeah.
elixirs for a little while. I'm very fortunate. I don't have the acidic sweat like I can normally get.
Yeah, I don't either. I can play a set of strings forever.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Just luck of the draw.
yeah, my Hamer over there with the Floyd Rose. I love Floyd Roses because I can put the string back on if it breaks. And
Yeah.
those strings must be
Yeah.
2 years old at least, and they're like they're brand new. But
Right.
I
That's
like
just
that.
luck. It's just the luck of the draw. Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's climate based. Like there have been times when here in Ventura in California, we're near the ocean. So there have been times when we've lived in a house that was closer to ocean air. And if you're leaving windows open, things will just be in the air. They'll come in and sort of, you'll find that the strings feel strange, after a while.
Yep.
So that can be not the fault of your acidity, of the player.
Yep.
But yeah.
Yeah. Frank, thank you so much for your time, man.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, the time flies, doesn't it? It's wow.
Yeah,
Over
6
2.5 hours.
hours.
Over
Yeah.
2.5 hours so far there, and
Yeah, but metric is not right. It's not as many.
yes, and
You
your
guys do the version, yeah.
man. I'm going to say thank you. I'll round things up, folks. If you enjoyed listening to me and Frank raving there, little like and a thumbs up and all that kind of thing. Look, I've even got a little button that puts that thing up there.
Right.
Yep. There it goes. Frank can't see that. Bang. There it is.
No.
But yeah, please like, subscribe, share. Got a good thing going over here. Had some amazing guests. It's just a matter of time before people find us. But thank you so much for sticking around. Frank, thank you. I got a little round of applause from everybody for you. And where can people find you online, mate? Frank Falbo Guitars?
Yeah, hit me up on Facebook. Facebook, I'm Falbo Guitars. On Instagram, or Facebook, I'm Falbo Designs, because I'll share some other R&D projects I'm working on, like the Fishman stuff or whatever. Instagram is Falbo Guitars. So yeah, find me Falbo Guitars, Falbo Designs.
Awesome. Thank you so much, mate. Time to hit the button and make my cool little icon come up that goes like this.